Eddard Stark had expected to die in the great September of Baelor, the sunlight catching in his eyes as he waited for the inevitable swing of the executioner's sword. He felt no fear then, only sorrow for all he would be leaving behind, his wife, his children, the North he loved, and the promise he had made to his dead sister so many years ago. But as the roar of the crowd thundered in his ears, an unexpected reprieve arrived. A hush slid over the gathered masses, and a shadow of confusion passed over King Joffrey's pale features. The words that followed dissolved into the chaos as guards hustled Ned away. By some twist of fate or cunning arrangement unknown to him, he was secreted from that stage of death, removed from King's Landing in the hush of a moonless night, and thrust into a future he never could have foreseen. The rumor at court was that his life had been spared at the urging of certain counselors who believed there was more to gain by keeping Eddard Stark alive than by killing him. Varys, with his penchant for whispered manipulations, might have played a part. Or perhaps it was the Queen Regent who saw a better use for a living Stark hostage. Whatever the reason, they had spirited Ned from the dungeons and replaced him with a hapless lookalike, someone with the same height and frame, perhaps forcibly drugged so that none could see his face clearly as the sword came down. Joffrey was appeased by the spectacle of Ned's supposed beheading, the crowd was sated by the blood they believed to see, and the city moved on. In truth, the real Eddard Stark was rushed into a covered wagon, unconscious from some vile concoction, aware only of flickering dreams and half-remembered visions of wolves and snow-laden roads. When at last he awoke, bones aching from days of stillness, he found himself bound to a narrow pallet reeking of stale sweat and sickness. A single candle guttered at the end of its wick, illuminating a cramped chamber of rough-hewn walls. He heard the distant churn of waves, realized the room swayed with the motion of the sea, and guessed he was aboard a ship. A slow understanding seeped into him. He was supposed to be dead. Whatever game his captors were playing, he remained their pawn. He drifted in and out of consciousness. At times, the door creaked open, admitting a small, quiet man who spooned a bitter broth between Ned's lips. He never responded to Ned's hoarse attempts at conversation. Sometimes he wore a hood, other times a wide-brimmed hat. Ned's mind, dulled by potions, registered only vague shapes and a swirl of dark hair. He tried demanding answers, tried asking about his daughters, about the war he was certain would follow his demise, but he received no replies. Days melted into one another. He regained enough strength to sit upright on his pallet. They allowed him to wash once, pouring a bucket of cold seawater over him while he struggled to keep his footing on the rocking planks. Each night he heard distant voices, sometimes arguments, sometimes calm discussions. If Varys was on board, Ned couldn't be certain. He heard no whisper that was distinct enough to identify. All he knew was that he was afloat on some southern sea, bound for an unknown shore. At last, one twilight, the door opened and the quiet man beckoned him to follow. Ned was so stiff that his knees nearly buckled, but he clenched his teeth and forced himself onward. He ascended narrow steps onto the deck where the smell of brine and rotting fish stung his nostrils. Overhead, the sky was awash of orange and pink with clouds like scattered embers. He saw an unfamiliar coastline dotted with tall, slender towers rising from a city of domed roofs and spires. They were approaching Pentos, or so he guessed, from rumors he'd heard of the free cities. Ned had never journeyed beyond the narrow sea. His life had been spent in the service of the realm and the love of the North. Now he stood on a strange ship with an uncertain future pressing down on him like a lead weight. The ship docked after sundown, its crew hurriedly mooring at a small, private pier. With a swift efficiency, Ned found himself shepherded down the gangplank. No one recognized him. In the darkness, he was just another passenger in worn clothes. The hooded man led him along winding streets, passing under towering arches and through a scented market where even at night vendors shouted bargains for olives, spiced meats, and exotic fruits. Eventually, they entered a walled compound, its gates guarded by men in black and gold liveries. Inside, marble pathways wove between colonnades lit by oil braziers. The hush was almost reverent. Ned was guided to a spacious chamber, appointed with plush cushions and carpets so thick his feet sank into them. A tall window overlooked a moonlit garden where water trickled from a fountain shaped like serpents coiling around each other. While Ned stood, unsure, the man who'd led him here turned to light a few lamps. Now, in full illumination, Ned saw that his escort was not a small man at all but a young woman, slender as a reed. She pulled back her hood, revealing a face with deep-set eyes and cropped hair. She wore a dagger at her hip and a single silver ring glinted on one finger. "Lord Stark," she said. Her voice was a quiet contralto, smoother than expected. "My master wishes to speak with you, but only when the time is right. Until then, you are to remain here. Food will be brought. You will not be harmed." Exhaustion weighed on Ned's shoulders. He wanted to rage, to demand an explanation, but the moment he opened his mouth, only a hoarse whisper emerged. He asked for water. The woman gestured to a pitcher on a low table, then turned to leave. She paused at the door. "Sleep, my lord. In the morning you will have answers." But those answers did not come the next morning or the next. Servants delivered meals at regular intervals. Bowls of broth, bread fresh from the oven, platters of fruit. The comfortable bed, the warm bathwater, and the soothing air of the garden were no prison cell. Yet Ned felt caged all the same. He had no sword, no idea who truly held him. Each day, he tried to corner one of the servants with questions. "Where am I? Who holds me here? Is the war over? Who sits the Iron Throne?" But they would not speak of such matters. They would only respond to small pleasantries, bowing politely and offering vague platitudes about how soon he would be given an audience to learn everything. At night, Ned paced across the carpet until he tired and fell asleep. He dreamed of Winterfell's walls in a swirl of snow, of Arya's mischievous smile and Sansa's tears, of Catelyn's gentle voice calling him home. But each time he woke, he was still in this foreign city, thousands of leagues from the north. Finally, one evening, the woman with cropped hair returned. She directed Ned to follow her through a colonnade that led deeper into the compound. She walked swiftly, forcing him to quicken his steps despite the lingering stiffness in his legs. Torches lit their way along a corridor where mosaics depicted dragons spiraling across a turquoise sky. At the end, a polished ebony door swung open, revealing a small courtyard with a central pool. Perfumes of night-blooming flowers drifted on the breeze. Beneath the glow of lanterns sat a figure robed in fine silks of deep purple, a glass of wine balanced on one knee. Ned recognized the man instantly, Illyrio Mopatis, the wealthy magister of Pentos, a known ally of the Targaryen exiles, if the rumors were true. The man's wide girth and carefully oiled beard told Ned he was well-fed, and his eyes gleamed with the cunning of a seasoned merchant. He smiled broadly as Ned approached, gesturing to an empty seat. The woman bowed and melted into the shadows, leaving Ned alone with Illyrio. "My dear Lord Stark," Illyrio began, his voice jovial but with a calculating lilt. "I can only imagine your confusion. Forgive the secrecy. These are dangerous times, and caution is our ally." Ned stood stiffly. "Your men took me from King's Landing, or from the headsman's block, it would seem. Why?" Illyrio sipped his wine before answering, as though pondering the taste. "You might say I have an interest in the stability of the realm, in ensuring a certain balance of powers. I have many connections, and I learned of the plan to execute you in the Great September. It struck me as wasteful to let the North's great warden perish under such circumstances. So I offered a rather expensive arrangement to ensure you were removed." Ned's voice tightened. "You mean you bribed the Lannisters, or the Crown's men, to send me away like a smuggled crate of goods?" "Something like that," Illyrio said with a small chuckle. "I have resources, and I use them as I see fit. Think of it as a negotiation with multiple parties. The important thing is this: you are alive." "And what would you have of me?" Ned asked warily. Illyrio gestured around the courtyard. "I harbor friends of yours, or at least potential friends. One might say you and we share an interest in the Targaryen lineage. You swore many years ago to keep a secret regarding a Targaryen child." "Yes." His voice was smooth, but the question cut to the core of Ned's greatest oath. It was not something he had spoken of to anyone, save his wife. But Illyrio's cunning eyes seemed to read the flicker of alarm across Ned's face. "Ah, so you see, I know more than you imagine. I know why you protected a certain boy all those years ago, passing him off as your own bastard. I know the truth of who Jon Snow really is." Ned's heart pounded. "Those are dangerous words." "Indeed," Illyrio said. "And in these dangerous times, alliances must be forged carefully. The dragons have returned, my friend. Across the sea in a place called Karth, I believe, or perhaps they have moved on. Daenerys Targaryen, mother of dragons, is real. She gained her dragons from the ashes of her husband's funeral pyre. Now, across the sea, she gathers strength and loyal followers. Some yearn for her to retake Westeros. Others plot her downfall. Word of her cause spreads quickly. Assassins have been dispatched more than once. Ned felt a chill. He knew Robert Baratheon had once tried to see the last Targaryens destroyed. But Robert was dead now, and Joffrey wore the crown. It was possible the Lannisters continued the same policy. The notion of dragons returning to the world felt like a fable turned real. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, though he suspected he already knew. Illyrio's smile was as smooth as the silk pillows behind him. "I want you to protect Daenerys Targaryen. You are a man of honor, recognized for your integrity. Who better to shield the last Targaryen queen from those who wish her harm? If what I believe about your nephew's parentage is true, you share blood with the Targaryen line. You might find your loyalties tested, but I suspect your sense of duty will prevail." Ned thought of all the horrors that Targaryens had visited upon Westeros, the Mad King's atrocities foremost among them. Yet, he also recalled that some Targaryens had been just rulers, admired, or even beloved. And if Daenerys was as vulnerable as Illyrio claimed, perhaps Ned could prevent more bloodshed, find a better path. But how was he to protect her? "I am not a sellsword for hire," he said quietly, though his mind swirled with the old vow he had made to Lyanna to protect her son. "Why would she trust me? I was Robert's friend, and Robert sought her death." "Daenerys knows that the tide of kings can shift," Illyrio said. "She might see you as a symbol of Westeros's good faith, or at least as a man of principle. Also, there may be others with influence who will urge her to accept your protection. The key is that you are Eddard Stark, a name that commands respect. Rumors of your beheading have reached far and wide, but now you live. The Lannisters cannot easily claim you back without exposing their own duplicities. They might prefer you remain vanished, forgotten. That could work to your advantage. If you join Daenerys in secret, you can thwart any further attempts on her life." Ned wrestled with conflicting loyalties. He did not trust Illyrio, but he could not deny that events were spiraling beyond his control, that war raged in Westeros, and that perhaps the only way to find peace was to guide a Targaryen claimant in a more merciful direction. The memory of the horrors visited on King's Landing during Robert's rebellion and the sacking by Lannister men still haunted him. If Daenerys truly lived, young and untested, she might become a greater terror, or, with the right counsel, a just queen. Ned knew that if she had dragons, her power would be immense. He could not bear the thought of more needless slaughter. At length he said, "I cannot decide such a fate in one night. If what you say is true, if the realm is in such tumult, I must at least speak with Daenerys Targaryen. I must see for myself whether she is the rightful queen or a threat to be contained." "Excellent," Illyrio purred, setting aside his wine. "Then we shall arrange your meeting. She is not in Pentos, of course, but the distance is not insurmountable. The seas carry many secrets. Rest tonight, Lord Stark. We depart at dawn in a caravan that will take you across the Valyrian coastline. From there, a ship awaits to bring you to the shores where the Queen of Dragons abides." Ned felt a knot form in his stomach. Once more, he would be carried away from everything he knew, deeper into a labyrinth of schemes and uncertain alliances. Yet, if he refused, he might never see his family again, never have a chance to shape the future of the realm he loved. Gritting his teeth, he inclined his head. "I will come, but let us be clear. If I think for a moment that your intent is to manipulate me or to harm Daenerys for your own gain, you will find I am not so helpless as I may appear." Illyrio's chuckle was a low rumble. "I respect your candor, my lord. May we forge a partnership that benefits us all." True to his word, Illyrio arranged everything. By first light, Ned was dressed in a simple traveler's cloak, swordless but otherwise free to move about. The caravan consisted of several wagons, laden with provisions and guarded by sellswords in Illyrio's employ. Ned sat in one of the wagons, silent, watchful. The route took them south and east, past dusty villages and rolling fields. The heat pressed on Ned, reminding him how far he was from the crisp breezes of the north. Each night, they made camp by a river or a sheltered copse of trees. Ned watched the guards carefully, noting their discipline. They spoke in hushed tones around their own fire, occasionally shooting suspicious glances at him. He understood. He was an outsider to them, a living ghost rumored to be dead. As the days stretched on, he gleaned scraps of information from overheard conversations. War raged in Westeros. Robb Stark had declared himself king in the north. Stannis Baratheon and Renly Baratheon warred with each other, both claiming the Iron Throne. Joffrey held King's Landing in a chokehold of Lannister power. The Greyjoys threatened the North's coasts. Ned's heart ached at the thought of his children scattered, possibly in danger. But there was no going back now. The Lannisters would imprison or kill him anew. If he was to help the North, help his family, he needed to see where Daenerys Targaryen stood in this grand game. 2 weeks passed in a haze of travel. They passed ancient ruins that whispered of Valyria's lost glory, broken towers covered in vine. Sometimes Ned would see a stone dragon's head jutting from the undergrowth, a silent guardian of secrets. Eventually, they reached a small coastal port where a compact ship awaited, a single-masted caravel with black sails. The journey overland had tested Ned's endurance. His muscles still ached from captivity. But as he stepped onto the deck of this new ship, he felt a faint stir of purpose. He was closer now to the heart of this new twist of fate. Illyrio, always polite and seemingly unflappable, saw him off at the docks. "Safe travels, Lord Stark. We will meet again in better times, I hope. My men will make sure you arrive at your destination. From there, I leave your path to your own discretion." Ned gave a curt nod, though he was not fool enough to believe Illyrio didn't intend to keep meddling from afar. The ship's sails unfurled, and soon they were gliding across dark waters that reflected the starlight. Ned stood at the prow, wind tugging at his hair, wondering what the morrow would bring. The crossing took a handful of days. The captain was a stern-faced man who spoke the common tongue haltingly, but Ned discerned that their destination was believed to be somewhere near Slaver's Bay, assuming Daenerys remained in that region. Apparently, she had once been the Khaleesi of a Dothraki Khalasar. After her husband's death, she'd burned the pyre that birthed her dragons, traveled to Karth, and from there, word grew hazy. Some said she sought an army of freed slaves, others that she had vanished into the Red Waste. But from Illyrio's sources, she had retaken a city called Ukai or Meereen, or was marching on them. The details shifted like desert sands. When at last the ship docked, they were in a port city on the edge of Slaver's Bay. The scent of spice and incense mingled with the stench of fish and salt. The architecture was different from Pentos. Here, golden pyramids rose amid cramped dwellings, and the people on the streets wore flowing robes or tunics of dyed linen. Sellswords from all corners of Essos wandered about, seeking contracts from wealthy patrons. Ned left the ship, accompanied by the cropped-hair woman who had first spoken to him in Pentos. She had never given her name. Now, she led him through bustling markets, speaking with a quiet efficiency to various locals in a tongue Ned did not understand. By midday, they arrived at a large stableyard where a modest retinue of horses awaited, along with a few hired guards. Their leader was a tall, muscular man with bronze skin and an eagle tattoo on his forearm. He nodded grimly at Ned before leading the way out of the city, heading inland. The land before them was harsh, flat in some places and rocky in others. Sparse vegetation clung to the dry soil, and the sun beat down relentlessly. Each day, they rose early to travel, resting during the midday heat under threadbare tarps, then pressing on into the cooler hours of late afternoon. At night, they made camp in shallow gullies or next to meager water sources, always wary of roaming brigands or Dothraki outriders. Ned noticed how the wind carried the distant wail of unknown creatures, or the hiss of shifting sands. He thought of how foreign this land was compared to the green and gray of the north. They encountered refugees on the road, men, women, and children fleeing a city that had fallen to Daenerys Targaryen's forces, or so they claimed. Some cursed the dragons, saying the winged beasts had scorched the city walls. Others praised the new queen for breaking the chains of slaves. The stories conflicted, but they all spoke of a young woman with silver-gold hair and 3 dragons circling the sky. An eerie wonder fell upon Ned each time he heard her name. Daenerys Stormborn, Targaryen in truth. They pressed on, guided now by rumors. Daenerys was marching north from Meereen, or was it she remained within the city walls to stabilize her rule? Each traveler they questioned gave a different account. Yet the general consensus was that Meereen had indeed fallen to her some time past, and she was now its queen, forging a new era of freedom. Or so the rumors said. The Sellsword leader led them in a wide arc around the region, explain. knowing that if she was near Meereen, they could perhaps approach discreetly. They did not want to stumble into a battlefield or be mistaken for enemies. At last, after many days of hard riding, they crested a rise and saw the city of Meereen in the distance, its great pyramid dominating the skyline, flanked by smaller stepped pyramids. War banners fluttered on the ramparts. Ned recognized the black and red sigils of House Targaryen. His breath caught at the sight. Beneath those walls, a throng of tents and pavilions stretched out. An encampment of unknown scope. Was Daenerys besieged, or merely hosting a gathering of freedmen and mercenaries? As they drew closer, they passed clusters of travelers seeking entry or commerce with the new regime. Some wore the marks of former slaves, burned scars or calloused wrists. They parted grudgingly when they saw the sellswords leading Ned's group. The city gates loomed ahead, guarded by unsullied soldiers in matching armor. Their spears and discipline were evident. When Ned's party approached, an officer halted them, demanding to know their business. The cropped-hair woman spoke quickly, presenting a small token with a dragon emblem. The officer listened, then dispatched a messenger. In due time, they were granted entry, weaving through the dusty streets of Meereen. Ned took in the changes, fewer chained slaves than he expected, but an undercurrent of tension among the local populace. Signs of recent battle scarred some walls, and the air was rife with a sense of transition. They were led through winding passages until they reached a courtyard near the base of the Great Pyramid. There, an official in flowing robes greeted them. He spared Ned only a cursory glance before focusing on the woman. "The queen is in her audience hall. You may await her pleasure in the antechamber." They dismounted, and Ned's pulse pounded. He was about to stand face to face with the last living Targaryen, so the world believed, the mother of dragons. His thoughts swirled with memories of Robert's wrath, of Rhaegar's fallen body on the trident, of Lyanna's plea in the Tower of Joy. He forced himself to remain calm. Honor demanded he see the truth with his own eyes. They ascended broad steps into the Great Pyramid. Inside, columns soared, lit by torches, and the air was cooler. Slaves, no ex-slaves perhaps, hurried about in newly minted liveries. The antechamber was a wide hall with cushioned benches along the walls. The official told them to wait. Hours passed. Ned found himself growing more apprehensive. He tried to recall everything he'd heard of Daenerys, her youth, her rumored beauty, her rumored ruthlessness. Would she see him as an enemy? At last, a guard beckoned them forward. Ned stepped across a threshold into a grand chamber. Rows of pillars framed a narrow aisle leading to a high dais. Braziers burned with perfumed coals, sending aromatic smoke into the rafters. Atop the dais, seated on a carved throne, was a young woman. Her hair was indeed silver blonde, cascading over her shoulders. She wore a loose-fitting gown of pale blue, and around her neck rested a single golden collar worked in the shape of small dragons. At her side stood a knight in white and gold armor, and behind her, partially hidden in the shadows, something large moved. A scaled tail? Ned's heart quickened at the realization that the dragons were here, living creatures in the gloom behind her throne. He advanced slowly, aware of the hush in the room. Servants and guards looked on with guarded curiosity. Before the dais, he paused. The woman's violet eyes studied him with an intensity that reminded him of a cat's focus. She did not appear cruel. If anything, he saw sorrow etched into the corners of her eyes, as though the burdens of rule weighed heavily on her. "Your Grace," the official intoned, "I present to you. I know who he is," Daenerys Targaryen said quietly. Her accent was soft, her voice carrying a certain warmth. She stood, descending from her throne with lithe grace. She drew near, her eyes not leaving Ned's face. Eddard Stark of Winterfell, who was said to have died in King's Landing. Ned bowed, though warily. "Your Grace, I was told you might receive me, and so I have come." She glanced at him, then at the cropped-hair woman who stood to one side. The woman gave a slight nod, as if confirming something. Daenerys's gaze flickered back to Ned. "I have heard tales of your honor, Lord Stark. You tried to spare my life when King Robert wanted me dead. You sought to do what was right, even if it cost you everything. I did, Ned said, his voice tight with emotion. Robert was my friend, but I could not condone the murder of children. And you were but a girl across the sea. I did not want more blood spilled. Daenerys studied him. I have heard many things about the Honorable Eddard Stark, how you once spared the life of your enemy's son, how you always sought justice. Tell me now, what is your purpose in coming here? For you stand before the daughter of the Mad King, who your friend helped dethrone. Ned felt the weight of her words. I come because I was rescued from execution by those who claim it is in the interest of peace, or in the interest of forging alliances. I come because I owe a duty to the realm to seek the best path forward. I am no friend to tyranny, no matter its name. If you would be a just ruler, if you truly seek to free the oppressed, then I will not stand in your way. Indeed, I might counsel and guide you. But if you are another tyrant— She raised a hand and he fell silent. There was something regal in her bearing, and a flicker of amusement in her eyes. Your honesty is refreshing. Many would grovel or flatter. I have no desire to become the tyrant my father was. I have fought to free slaves here in Essos. I have faced betrayal and heartbreak, and I have learned that a queen without the love of her people is no queen at all. In the stillness, a creature emerged from behind the throne, a scaled reptile the size of a large hound, black and red, with eyes that gleamed like molten gold. It hissed softly, steam curling from its nostrils. Ned's breath caught. A living dragon. He could scarcely believe it even as it stretched its wings, the membrane reflecting the torchlight. Daenerys reached out, a hand on the dragon's flank, and the beast quieted, though it kept its gaze fixed on Ned. These are my children, Drogon, Regal, and Viserion. They are my strength, but also my responsibility. I do not wish to conquer Westeros as my father might have. I want to free it from the Lannisters' cruelty, from the squabbles of Baratheons. I want to break the wheel that has ground ordinary folk underfoot for centuries. Ned remembered the small folk of King's Landing, starving or crushed by the weight of war. He thought of the chaos that had ensued after his supposed death. He had to know one thing above all else. If you claim the Iron Throne, would you slaughter those who oppose you? Would you bring fire and blood as your house words proclaim? Her eyes softened. I have learned that mercy and justice must walk hand in hand. I have made mistakes, but I strive to spare the innocent. If I unleash my dragons, it is not wanton destruction I seek. I do not wish to be the Queen of Ashes. A long silence followed. Ned, guided by instinct, knelt slowly on one knee. Then, Your Grace, I will do my utmost to help you become the queen you wish to be if you will accept my counsel. Let us bring an end to the slaughter in Westeros. Let us see if there is a future that does not bathe the 7 kingdoms in blood. Daenerys reached out, beckoning him to rise. You would serve me, Lord Stark? Even after all that has transpired, after Robert's rebellion, after the crimes my father committed? I serve no tyrant, Ned said, standing upright. But I will serve a just queen who would protect the realm. If you are that queen, you shall have my loyalty. A small smile touched her lips. Then rise. We have much to discuss. From that day onward, Ned found himself part of Daenerys' inner circle, though some members, like her knights Ser Barristan and Selmy, regarded him with caution. Barristan was once part of the King's Guard under the Targaryens and also served Robert. He seemed torn, uncertain whether Ned's presence was a boon or a threat. Daenerys, however, treated Ned with a mixture of wary curiosity and earnest interest in his counsel. Slowly, trust grew, fed by shared convictions. He witnessed her holding court, listening to petitions from freed slaves and city nobles. He saw her wrestle with the complexities of ruling Meereen, keeping the peace amid rebellious factions who wanted the old ways restored. He offered advice on how to handle disputes, reminding her that justice must be balanced with forgiveness. There were days of friction when Daenerys' temper flared at those who undermined her authority. But Ned saw that she genuinely cared for her people, that she grieved for any loss of life. Months passed in that city. Word arrived from Westeros. Robb Stark waged a bitter campaign against the Lannisters, but betrayal at the twins left him dead, along with many of the northern lords. Ned wept in private, cursing his captivity, cursing that he had not been there to protect his son. He learned that the Boltons had taken Winterfell, that his younger sons were missing, presumed dead. His heart broke piece by piece as each Raven's message delivered new tragedy. Sansa was rumored to be a captive in King's Landing, while Arya's fate was unknown. It was almost too much to bear. In his grief, he nearly left Daenerys' side, desperate to return to Westeros. But it was Daenerys who came to him in the small hours of the night, speaking softly of her own losses, her brother Viserys, her child stillborn in the Dothraki Sea, her husband Khal Drogo who died from treachery. She confessed she felt alone even with an entire city looking to her. In that moment, they shared a raw bond of sorrow. When dawn came, Ned resolved that if Westeros was to be saved from the pit of endless war, perhaps Daenerys was its best hope. He would remain. He would help shape her path, ensure she did not become the tyrant Robert once feared. And in the process, he might still find a way to free his daughters and avenge his son. Over time, he learned more of her dragons. Drogon was the largest, black as night, fierce and temperamental. Regal's scales shone green and bronze while Viserion gleamed like pale gold. They grew quickly, roaming the skies around Meereen. Daenerys used them sparingly, but their presence was a potent deterrent against rebels and slavers. Ned watched them fly at dusk, remembering the old tales of Aegon the Conqueror. He wondered what Westeros would make of their return. Indeed, it was not long before assassins came. Rumors spread of wealthy slavers hiring sellswords or agents of the Iron Throne seeking to kill Daenerys. Late one night, Ned roused from his chambers by the clash of steel. He rushed into the corridors, a borrowed sword in hand, just in time to see masked figures skirmishing with unsullied guards. Flames flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. He saw one assassin slip past the guards and dart toward Daenerys' quarters. Without hesitation, Ned gave chase. The man was lithe, clad in black, his face hidden behind a wrap of cloth. He moved with the grace of a trained killer, a dagger glinting in his hand. Ned's muscles burned as he pushed himself, closing the distance. When they reached the threshold to Daenerys' private chambers, the assassin spun, slashing with the dagger. Ned parried with clumsy ferocity, the blow jarring his arm. The man twisted free. They circled each other in the half-lit corridor. Ned, mindful of the assassin's agility, feinted high, then brought his blade across in a slashing arc. The assassin dodged, hissing something in a language Ned did not know. A second slash opened a shallow cut on Ned's forearm. He bit back a cry of pain, pressing forward. The old instincts of a warrior rose in him, and he forced the assassin onto the back foot, pinning him against the wall. With a final strike, he disarmed the man. The dagger clattered to the floor. The assassin tried to reach for a hidden blade at his belt, but Ned shoved him, smashing his head against the stone. He slumped, unconscious or worse. Daenerys, awakened by the commotion, emerged from her chambers wearing a thin robe. Her eyes widened at the sight of Ned standing over the body. Blood seeped down Ned's arm. "Seven hells," he muttered, stepping back as the guards arrived to secure the scene. The next day, Daenerys learned that several assassins had struck across the city, targeting her key advisors. Some were killed by the Unsullied, others had fled. But it was clear she was under direct threat, her life a bounty for those cunning enough to slip through. In the aftermath, she called Ned to her throne room. There, amid the flickering torches, she addressed him. "You have my gratitude, Lord Stark," she said. "You risked your life to protect mine. I will not forget it." Ned inclined his head. "I did what needed to be done." She regarded him for a long moment. "I see now that this war will not wait for me to stabilize Essos. The assassins will keep coming, and soon the Lannisters or other Westerosi lords will send deadlier agents. I must consider a move to Westeros sooner than I planned. But if I go, I risk plunging the realm into chaos." Ned sighed. "The realm is already in chaos, Your Grace. The north is in ruin, the Riverlands in flames. The Lannisters hold King's Landing, but their grip is not secure. A Targaryen returning with dragons that will shake every kingdom to its core." She stood, coming down from the dais. "Will you help me? Will you stand at my side, guide me in this? I cannot undo the pain your family has suffered, but perhaps we can ensure no more families endure the same horrors. I would see justice done, but not vengeance for vengeance's sake." He thought of the faces of his children, of Robb, lost in betrayal, of Sansa captive, of Arya's fate unknown, Bran and Rickon rumored dead. He thought of the words of his sister Lyanna, long ago, dying in her bed of blood. "Promise me, Ned," she had whispered. He had promised to protect her child, but that secret threatened to tear him apart. Jon Snow, Rhaegar's heir, might still live, out there in the midst of war or beyond the wall. Could Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow share the future of the Iron Throne? Perhaps that was a question for another day. At last, Ned met Daenerys' gaze. "I will do what I can to help you end the madness tearing Westeros apart. If you are willing to temper justice with mercy, then yes, I will stand by you." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, as though the weight of the world pressed upon her. "Then let us begin. We must secure an army, gather ships, and sail for Westeros. We will not ravage the lands we wish to save, but we will stand against the tyranny of the Lannisters." Ned bowed his head. "Yes, your grace." So commenced a new chapter in Daenerys Targaryen's rule. Over the ensuing weeks, she consolidated her hold on Meereen and the surrounding areas, forging alliances with those liberated from slavery. She prepared the city for her departure by leaving trusted advisors to maintain order. Meanwhile, ships were acquired, some purchased, others seized from slavers. The dragons continued to grow, venturing further afield, sowing both hope and dread among those who witnessed their might. Ned immersed himself in the planning, sharing strategic knowledge of Westeros's geography, lords, and strongholds. He identified potential allies who might flock to Daenerys's cause once she arrived: the Tyrells, spurned by Lannister arrogance; the Martells, who harbored deep resentment for past wrongs; the Stormlands, in chaos after the Baratheon brothers' war. News trickled in of the White Walkers in the far north, though few outside the Night's Watch believed those stories. Ned knew better than most that dark omens lay beyond the wall. The realm would need unity to face such a threat. Perhaps Daenerys' arrival could unite Westeros or break it further apart. The day finally came when the Targaryen fleet set sail. The city of Meereen gathered along the harbor to watch, some cheering, others anxious. Daenerys stood at the prow of the flagship, Drogon perched atop the mast, wings spread to catch the sea breeze. Rhaegal and Viserion swooped overhead, letting out shrill cries. Beside her stood Tyrion Lannister, yes, the infamous dwarf who had fled Westeros and found his way into Daenerys' service, and Missandei, her loyal interpreter. Ned was near at hand, gazing back at the receding city. The sigh of the wind in the sails and the churn of waves underscored the gravity of the moment. Once they crossed the narrow sea, there would be no turning back. Days turned into weeks on the open water. Storms tested the metal of their ships, lightning illuminating the dragons as they soared above the roiling sea. Ned huddled with Daenerys and her advisors in the captain's cabin, finalizing the plan for their landing. They debated where best to make landfall. Dorne offered an enticing route, given House Martell's animosity toward the Lannisters, but there was the matter of forging that alliance. Dragonstone, the ancient seat of House Targaryen, was another possibility. In the end, they chose Dragonstone, believing its symbolism and strategic location near King's Landing could serve as a rallying point. When at last they sighted Westeros's coast, Ned felt a rush of emotions. The rolling green hills and jagged cliffs were like a ghost of home. Daenerys stood at his side, quiet and contemplative. "We have returned," she murmured, her voice almost lost in the wind. Dragonstone's forbidding towers and basalt walls loomed as the fleet approached. They found the castle lightly held by a token Lannister force, which surrendered quickly rather than face Dragonfire. Daenerys stepped onto the black sands, the wind tangling her silver hair, Drogon roaring overhead. Ned could almost sense the shift in the very air, as if the land remembered the Targaryens of old. The gates swung open, and she entered the fortress once claimed by Stannis Baratheon. Once inside the great hall, she ascended the dais and placed a hand on the carved dragon throne. The long tapestry of history seemed to converge in that moment, Aegon the Conqueror's seat, now reclaimed by his descendant. In the following weeks, ravens flew from Dragonstone to all corners of Westeros, announcing that Daenerys Targaryen had returned to claim her birthright. Some lords ignored the message, others sneered at the idea of a foreign queen. But a few responded with cautious interest. Meanwhile, the Lannisters readied their forces, and Cersei, now Queen Regent in truth after Joffrey's demise at his own wedding feast, vowed to destroy the usurper whore. The stage was set for a colossal struggle. Yet the real threat, Ned thought, lay beyond petty kings and queens. Word arrived from the north of a gathering darkness of undead armies marching south. Jon Snow, now Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Ned's heart soared at the news that his nephew was still alive, sent letters pleading for unity against the White Walkers. Daenerys read the letters with grave concern. To Ned's surprise, she insisted they first ascertain the truth. If the threat was real, she vowed to defend the realm of the living no matter what throne she claimed. So the Game of Thrones twisted again. Daenerys resolved to meet Jon Snow to see for herself the nephew she did not know she had. Ned wrestled with whether to reveal Jon's parentage. He had kept the secret for so long to protect the boy from Robert's wrath. Now Robert was gone and the realm had new players. Perhaps it was time for the truth to shine. Yet he feared how Daenerys would react. Would she see Jon as a rival or welcome him as family? Before they could orchestrate such a meeting, the war came knocking at Dragonstone's gates. A Lannister fleet massed under Euron Greyjoy's command, a brash and unpredictable pirate lord who sought power and favor from Cersei. Daenerys, determined to protect her beachhead, took to the skies on Drogon. The dragons rained fire upon the enemy ships, sending many to the depths. Ned, watching from the ramparts, felt torn between awe and dread. This was the power of dragons unleashed, reminiscent of the old Targaryen conquest. Had she not claimed she would be merciful? But Daenerys was no fool. She recognized that burning entire fleets might win battles but lose hearts. She ordered the dragons to strike key vessels while sparing the rest, forcing them to flee. In the aftermath, she accepted the surrender of many sailors, offering them a chance to serve her or return home. Her example set a precedent, a queen who wielded dragonfire yet showed clemency. Slowly, word of her mercy spread. In the lull after the battle, the expected missive arrived from the north. Jon Snow was on his way, accompanied by a small retinue. Daenerys prepared Dragonstone to receive him, uncertain of his intentions. Ned's anxiety soared. He longed to see Jon, to speak with him of Lyanna, to atone for the deceptions. Yet he also feared the consequences of the truth. The day Jon Snow arrived was a gray, windswept morning. Ned stood beside Daenerys in the courtyard, unsullied, lining the walls. The gate opened, admitting a small band of riders. At their head was a young man clad in black and fur, a sword at his hip. He dismounted, scanning the fortress with wary curiosity. When his eyes fell upon Ned, they widened with disbelief. "Father." Jon's voice trembled, though he corrected himself. "Or, my lord. They told me you were dead." Ned felt a lump in his throat. "I was spared, though the world believes otherwise. Forgive me, Jon, for leaving you and the rest of our family in such peril." Jon gave a curt nod, struggling with a swirl of emotions. Then his gaze shifted to Daenerys Targaryen, and he bowed stiffly. "Your Grace." Daenerys regarded him with a calm but intense gaze. "Lord Commander Snow, you have traveled far." Jon cleared his throat. "I come seeking aid against the threat beyond the wall. The army of the dead marches closer with each passing day. My men have faced the White Walkers. We cannot hope to stand alone." A hush fell. Daenerys' expression was thoughtful, though her posture remained regal. "I have heard your plea, Lord Commander, and I am inclined to believe you. My dragon's birth was tied to magic returning to the world, and I have heard rumors of unnatural cold in the far north. If this threat is as dire as you say, it concerns not just the north, but all of Westeros." Jon exhaled in relief. "Then you will help us?" Daenerys glanced at Ned, then back at Jon. "I will, but I ask for your aid in return. The Lannisters hold the throne. They will not support this battle against the undead. If you, as the king in the north—" "I am no king," Jon interrupted. "My sister Sansa holds Winterfell in trust, if it still stands. The north is in disarray, but I bend the knee to no one but necessity. Right now, that necessity is the war against the dead." Ned saw the flicker of offense in Daenerys' eyes. But before she could speak, Jon pressed on, his tone earnest. "I do not say this to defy you, your grace. We have no time for squabbles of kings and queens. We need unity. If you come north, if you help us fight, I believe the north will see you as a savior, not a conqueror." Daenerys' brow knitted. She turned to Ned. "What say you, Lord Stark? Does the north follow your son, your nephew?" Ned's heart pounded. He wrestled with the secret. Taking a breath, he said, "Jon, you and I must speak in private, with the queen as witness. There is a truth I have kept far too long." They retreated to a quieter chamber within the fortress, leaving the retinues outside. Once the door closed, Ned faced Jon, feeling the weight of decades pressing down. Daenerys stood nearby, her violet eyes flicking between them. "What is it, father?" Jon asked, confusion written on his face. Ned's voice trembled. "I am not your father, Jon. Your mother was my sister, Lyanna Stark, and your father was Rhaegar Targaryen." A silence more profound than any Ned had known descended upon the room. Jon stared, expression frozen. He shook his head, laughter of disbelief catching in his throat. That cannot be. Rhaegar kidnapped and my mother, she died giving birth to me." Ned spoke gently. "They loved each other, Jon. Married in secret. When Robert rebelled, he believed Rhaegar had stolen Lyanna away by force. She died in childbirth, made me swear to protect you. Robert would have killed you had he known you were a Targaryen. So I claimed you as my bastard to keep you safe." Jon's face was pale, eyes wide with shock. Daenerys took a step back, hand pressed to her chest. "Then you are my nephew," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You are the son of my brother Rhaegar." Jon's gaze flicked to her, tears brimming. This changes everything. Am I the rightful heir?" His words trailed off, lost in the enormity of the revelation. Ned reached out, laying a comforting hand on Jon's shoulder. "I kept this secret to protect you. I'm sorry, but with the realm in crisis, with the White Walkers marching, the truth could unite us or tear us apart." Daenerys' lips parted. She stared at Jon, tears threatening in her own eyes. My brother was the rightful heir next in line after our father. If he married your mother and you were legitimate, then you outrank me in the line of succession." Jon shook his head fiercely. "I never wanted a crown. I only want to save the living. This birthright, if it causes strife between us, then it's better left undisclosed. The North will fight for me because they have known me all my life, but I will not challenge your claim to the throne. You have the dragons, the armies. You have the will. Let me serve at your side as kin if kin we be." A fragile silence took hold. Then Daenerys stepped forward, placing a trembling hand over Jon's. "We must stand together. The living must not tear each other apart when the dead gather at our doorstep. I swear to you, Jon Targaryen, Snow, Stark, whatever name you keep, that I will not let our shared blood spark a war between us. Let us unite for the realm, for the future." Jon drew a shaky breath, nodding. Ned felt relief and trepidation swirl in equal measure. The secret was out, but would it hold them together or shatter them in time? Thus began the final forging of their alliance. Daenerys, Jon, and Ned labored tirelessly to gather allies: House Stark in the north, House Arryn in the Vale, House Targaryen's loyalists, the scattered forces who despised Lannister rule. They negotiated with the Iron Islands, offering them freedom in exchange for their ships. They sought a truce with King's Landing and Armistice to face the White Walkers. Cersei Lannister feigned cooperation, though few trusted her word. At last, the day came when Daenerys and Jon both set foot on Winterfell's frosty grounds. The northern lords were uneasy, uncertain how to react to a Targaryen queen accompanied by Ned Stark, returned from the dead, and a man some had proclaimed king in the north. Yet as winter winds howled and ravens bore word of undead hosts encroaching, they found common cause in survival. The White Walkers were real, and ancient terror awakened. Their only hope was unity under Dragonfire and Northern Steel. In the thick of preparations, assassins still lurked. Lannister agents, unscrupulous Sells-words, zealots who believed Targaryens must be exterminated. Danger came from many corners. Ned swore himself as Daenerys' sworn shield, a second watchful guardian alongside her Dothraki bloodriders and Unsullied. Once he might have balked at standing guard over a Targaryen, but he had seen her heart, watched her free slaves and spare enemies. She was not the Mad King. She might be their best chance for a future unscarred by endless war. Winterfell's ramparts were newly repaired, the courtyard filled with blacksmiths hammering weapons of dragonglass. The sounds of forging mixed with the howls of dire wolves from the godwood. Sansa stood as Lady of Winterfell, her face etched by betrayal and loss, yet still proud. Arya appeared like a wraith one evening, silent and haunted, her blade needle always at her side. Bran, too, returned, though changed, speaking cryptic prophecies. The Starks were reunited, though not as they once were. The war had changed them all. Ned embraced each child, tears in his eyes, humbled by the adversity they had survived in his absence. He made countless apologies, but they forgave him, for he was their father, and they had all suffered enough. The days grew shorter, the winds colder. Daenerys' dragons took to the skies above Winterfell, painting a breathtaking but ominous tableau of black and red against the snow-laden clouds. At times, villagers from nearby holdings flocked to see the wonders, offering what little grain and livestock they had to sustain the armies preparing for war. When at last the army of the dead came into view, rank upon rank of whites, led by pale riders on undead horses, Winterfell's defenders steeled themselves. Ned stood on the battlements with Daenerys, Jon, and the remaining Stark children. The dragons circled overhead, roaring defiance into the bitter cold. A hush fell over the gathered forces, a hush broken only by the scraping of 1,000 bony limbs dragging across frost. "Light the trenches," Sansa cried, commanding archers with dragonglass-tipped arrows. Flames leapt up, forming a ring of fire around Winterfell's walls. The enemy horde pressed forward regardless, mindless of self-preservation. Daenerys mounted Drogon, eyes aflame with determination. "We end this. For the living." She spurred the dragon upward, Jon following on regal. Ned watched them streak across the sky, unleashing jets of dragonfire upon the dead. The roar was deafening, waves of heat clashing with the biting chill of undead magic. The earth rumbled, corpses ignited. But the White Walkers were cunning, focusing their own freezing powers on the dragons, hurling ice spears. One whistled past Regal's flank, narrowly missing Jon. Ned joined the fighting on the ground, leading a company of Northmen. He wielded a sword of Valyrian steel, courtesy of Daenerys, who understood its power against the White Walkers. In the chaos, he clashed with reanimated corpses, each swing severing limbs that continued to writhe. The stench of death was overwhelming, the shrieks inhuman. Yet the living fought on, bound together by desperation. Time blurred into a crescendo of violence. Ned saw Tormund Giant's Bane hacking at Whites with fierce roars, Ser Brienne of Tarth valiantly defending the gates, and Grey Worm leading the Unsullied in tight formation. Overhead, Drogon's flames lit the night sky, casting flickering shadows on the swirling snow. The White Walkers advanced, their chilling aura sapping the courage of lesser men. But the North had steel in its spine, and the Targaryen queen had fire in her veins. Suddenly, a swirling gust of icy wind enveloped Drogon. Ned saw Daenerys plummet from the saddle, tumbling onto a rampart. Drogon roared, thrashing in pain, an ice spear lodged in his shoulder. Panic knifed through Ned. He abandoned his position, sprinting through the melee. He reached the rampart where Daenerys had fallen. She lay unmoving, her face pale. A White Walker advanced on her, crystalline eyes gleaming. Ned blocked its path, heart pounding. Their blades met Valyrian steel against ice-forged sword. The force jolted Ned's arms, but he stood firm. Back, he roared, slashing with all his might. The White Walker's sword shattered under the Valyrian steel. With a final thrust, Ned pierced the creature's chest. It disintegrated into shards, vanishing on the wind. Gasping, Ned knelt beside Daenerys, checking her pulse. She stirred, eyelids fluttering. "Lord Stark," she managed. He helped her stand, supporting her weight. The cold had numbed her, but she was alive. Drogon still circled overhead, wounded but furious, breathing fire in defiance. Ned guided Daenerys down the ramp to safety, fending off a handful of Whites that lunged for them. The flickering of torches revealed her face, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. He pressed a rag to the wound. In the yard below, Jon Snow fought with the Night King himself, their blades ringing in the icy air. Regal soared above, screeching in agitation. The Night King's power crackled, threatening to freeze even Dragonfire. Ned urged Daenerys to remain behind the partial cover of the rampart while he rushed to Jon's aid. But before he could reach them, the clang of steel on ice exploded in a flurry of sparks. Jon landed a strike, Valyrian steel biting into the Night King's chest. A sudden flash of blue light blinded Ned. When he blinked it away, the Night King shattered into 1,000 fragments of ice. A wave of collapse rippled through the undead. Whites toppled lifelessly to the ground, puppets with their strings cut. The hush that followed was deafening. Then the living burst into ragged cheers, exhausted sobs, and collapses of relief. The Great War for the Dawn, so many millennia in the making, had found its resolution in that single stroke of Valyrian steel. Ned sank to his knees, tears mingling with sweat and blood. The terror was ended. The living had prevailed. In the days that followed, the North mourned its dead and honored its heroes. Pyres burned, sending ashes into the crisp winter sky. Families reunited or grieved lost loved ones. The alliance between Daenerys Targaryen and the Starks was sealed not only in blood and fire but in the shared triumph of survival. Even the most skeptical Northmen now looked upon the Dragon Queen with a measure of respect. Ned stood at Winterfell's battlements one final time beside Daenerys and Jon. Snow drifted lazily and the hush of a world at peace settled over them. Cersei Lannister remained a threat in the south, but the greatest enemy of all, the army of the dead, was gone. Daenerys gazed out at the wintry landscape. "We must unite the realm at last. No more petty wars. Let us rebuild, let us heal." Jon nodded. "Aye. Our people have paid too high a price already." Ned placed a hand on each of their shoulders, a father's gesture to children now grown into their own destinies. "The future is yours to shape. Rule with honor, with compassion, and the realm will follow." They stood together as the snow-laden wind brushed over them. A hush of solemn determination passed between the Targaryen queen and the newly acknowledged Targaryen prince, with Ned Stark, once a man who might have died on the steps of the Great September, standing as their protector and guide. It was not the future any of them had imagined, but it was one forged by unyielding courage and tempered by mercy. And in that unity, a new song began, its chords echoing across the halls of Winterfell, across the fields of battle, and into the hearts of all who yearned for peace. They spent a long time simply standing there on Winterfell's battlements, hearts full with the aftermath of the impossible victory they had won. The sky was a pale gray, swirled with the last flurries of snow left in the wake of the Night King's demise. The courtyard below bustled with life, albeit a haggard, broken sort of life. Small folk, soldiers, and lords alike were moving between the bodies of the fallen, carrying the wounded toward makeshift infirmaries, tending funeral pyres, and saying final prayers for those lost. Though the war for the dawn had ended in triumph, the cost loomed everywhere: battered ramparts, splintered gates, makeshift barricades half-burned or kicked over, and the thick scent of blood and ash clinging to the winter wind. Eddard Stark gazed across the fields beyond Winterfell, where the snow was churned into mud and blackened with sooty streaks. Here and there lay piles of bones and rotting corpses, the remnants of the White Army that had collapsed when Jon Snow slew the Night King. Occasionally, someone found the remains of a comrade or friend crying out for the maesters to gather them for the pyres. Amid that labyrinth of the dead stood the living, forging new bonds in the shadow of extraordinary horror. Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow were at Ned's side. Only a day had passed since Jon had learned the truth of his parentage, that he was no Snow, no simple bastard, but a Targaryen born of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, an heir who arguably outstripped Daenerys in claims of succession. The revelation still shimmered between them, unresolved. It hung like the promise of a storm on the horizon, but for now, the living had survived and the dead were banished back to the cold darkness. That victory overshadowed all else. "Your Grace," said Ned quietly, finally finding his voice as the chill wind whipped his hair across his brow. "I should see to my wounded men. We cannot leave them untended while we talk of what comes next." Daenerys nodded. She stood wrapped in a heavy fur cloak, the cinders from Drogon's fire still staining her gloves. Her face had lost its color after the fall she had taken in the midst of battle. A shallow cut marred her temple, though the maesters had cleaned and dressed it with healing salves. "Go," she replied gently. "We will need all our strength in the coming days. Our victory came at a terrible price." Jon made as if to follow Ned, then hesitated. "I'll join you both. There's much we have to do." His gaze took in Daenerys's injuries, the smears of blood still on her armor. "But first, Your Grace, might you permit me to escort you to the maesters? That bandage is half-soaked." She opened her mouth to protest. There was a fervor in Daenerys that rarely let her stand idle when duty called, but the dull ache in her head and the unsteady feeling in her knees spoke louder. Even strong queens needed rest. "Very well. Ser Jorah would have insisted on the same if he were still alive to see me stubbornly refusing help." A pang of grief darted across her features at the memory of her loyal knight who had fallen defending her from the Whites. Daenerys swallowed, voice faltering. Then she shook her head and steadied herself. With a grateful glance at Jon, she started down the winding steps. Ned, too, felt the loss of Ser Jorah. He had known Jorah's father, Jeor Mormont, the old bear of the Night's Watch, an honorable man who had believed in the realm even when the realm had forgotten him. The circle of memory felt tight in his chest. He laid a hand upon the rampart for support. His wound from that final confrontation with an ice-wreathed wight still burned. Though not deep, it reminded him how close death had come. Once Daenerys descended, flanked by unsullied guards, Jon lingered a moment, meeting Ned's eyes. There was a question there, unspoken, about all that lay between them, fatherhood that was never truly fatherhood, secrets that had defined Jon's entire life. "We'll talk," Jon murmured. "Aye, we will," Ned replied softly. "But not while there are good men and women lying in the cold, awaiting aid or a pyre. There will be time for everything else." Jon gave a terse nod, set his jaw, and followed Daenerys down into the courtyard. Ned allowed himself one more glance over the ruined fields. A swirl of guilt, sorrow, and a flicker of renewed hope coiled in his gut. The White Walkers were gone, but the rest of their battles had only just begun. He descended into the courtyard. Dead whites still littered the ground, eyes extinguished, limbs contorted in grotesque final poses. Winterfell's surviving archers were picking among them, stabbing the remains just to be certain. Tormund Giantsbane was among them, roaring instructions to a few Night's Watch brothers who had also survived. The fiery-haired wildling gave Ned a stern nod, respect shining through despite Tormund's usual brashness. Ned made his way to the Great Hall, which had become a field hospital. Inside, the stench of blood was thick, but the warmth of roaring fires offered some relief to those wounded in body and spirit. He saw Maester Wolkan, face pale with exhaustion, stooped over a northern soldier whose leg had been partially severed. Arya Stark stood nearby, handing the Maester fresh bandages, the corners of her mouth fixed in a grim line. Arya barely seemed the same child he had last seen in King's Landing all those moons ago. She was older, sharper, eyes hardened by experiences she had yet to speak of. "Arya," Ned called gently. She turned, saw him, and for a heartbeat, something softer broke through her mask of steel. "Father," she answered quietly. Then she gestured to the soldiers who lay moaning on pallets of straw. "I'm helping the maesters. There are so many. The pyres are lit out in the Godwood and they're bringing more bodies every hour." Ned placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. And he meant it. Whatever storms she had weathered, she still carried that fierce compassion for the living. "Let me help." Together, they moved among the wounded. Ned recognized men from various corners of the realm, northern bannermen, surviving knights from the Vale, a few Riverlanders who had found their way here in time for the battle, and even the Dothraki, who nursed terrible injuries from their first encounter with the dead. Translators scurried about, bridging the language gaps. No one was turned away. The entire realm, indeed the entire world, had been at stake. Ned grabbed a stack of bandages, pressing them into the hands of a trembling Dothraki warrior whose arm hung in tatters. The man's eyes darted with fear, but Ned's calm presence seemed to reassure him. "Bait the wound. Wrap tightly. We'll find a maester soon." The man gave a curt nod, maybe not understanding all the words but understanding the gentleness in Ned's tone. He turned to find Sansa near the dais, orchestrating the distribution of food and water. She wore a heavy cloak that had once belonged to their mother, and her expression was poised, regal. She glanced up as Ned approached. Surprise and relief flickered across her face. "Father," she said quietly, stepping away from the Northman she was directing. "I didn't think we would have time to speak properly. It's also," she gestured helplessly at the hall full of wounded. Ned took both her hands in his, ignoring the grime and blood that smeared her fingers. "When this is done, we will sit and talk. You've held Winterfell in trust. You have done more than I could ever have asked. But for now, keep doing what you must. The realm might not realize how essential your leadership is, but I do." Sansa lowered her eyes, blinking back tears. "Mother would have wanted me to do my duty," she murmured. "Even if that means standing in the Great Hall, telling men where to sleep, how to ration the bread, and how to care for the lost." Ned recalled Catelyn's fierce devotion to her children and to the North. In Sansa's posture, he glimpsed so many echoes of his beloved wife. "Yes," Ned said quietly. "That's precisely what she would have done. I see her in you." And for the first time, Sansa's lips curved into a faint but genuine smile. They parted again, each slipping into the tide of crisis. Wolves and dragons, men of the watch and freed slaves from Essos, all working side by side in the stifling, blood-soaked hall. By the time Ned had bound the last wound he could manage and handed out the last scrap of bandage, hours had passed. His arms ached, and his own cut had bled through the linen around his bicep. He realized too late that he needed a fresh dressing himself. He forced himself to climb a narrow staircase into the old maester's turret, where he found Jon. The young man sat in a corner, head down, while Maester Wolkan applied salve to a shallow laceration on Jon's cheek. With the immediate crisis subsiding in the hall below, Ned finally had a moment to take in the changed countenance of the boy he had raised. Jon's hair was longer, his eyes haunted, the tension in his shoulders that of a seasoned soldier. Yet overshadowing all of that was the knowledge that Jon was truly Rhaegar's son and, by law, a rightful Targaryen heir. Jon glanced up, saw Ned standing in the doorway, and motioned him closer. Maester Wolkan gave a respectful nod to Ned, though still blinking with confusion at seeing the Lord of Winterfell in the flesh. Everyone had believed Eddard Stark dead for so long that his presence felt like an echo from a dream. But Wolkan had quickly adapted. There were more pressing matters than illusions of old. "How fare the men, father?" Jon asked softly. Then he corrected himself, lips pressing together. "I mean, Ned. I'm sorry." Ned felt that pang again. "I will always be father to you if you wish," he said gently, moving to stand beside Jon. "Though we both know the truth now. None of this changes what we've been through or the love we share. You are still my son in all the ways that matter." Jon's eyes swam with turbulent emotion. Then he nodded. "Thank you," he murmured. "It's been a lot to take in, with the Night King, then this revelation, and now the realm threatens to slip back into war if we don't tread carefully." He clenched his jaw. "Maester Wolkan, is he?" "Jon is stable," Wolkan replied, securing the bandage on Jon's cheek. "He needs to rest, but that's true of us all. If the realm's troubles allow such luxuries." Ned gave the maester a solemn look. "We appreciate your service, Wolkan. Thousands would be dead already if not for you and the other healers." He patted Jon's shoulder. "Let's get you someplace to recover. Then we'll talk. Properly." But Jon shook his head and rose to his feet, ignoring the sting of his wound. "I can't rest yet. We need an immediate council, Daenerys, you, Sansa, and the other lords. We must decide our next move." Ned wanted to protest, to insist that Jon take at least a few hours' respite. But the gravity of the post-battle world weighed on them all. Cersei Lannister's banner still flew over King's Landing, and once word of the White Walkers' defeat spread, she would know that Daenerys and the North were free to turn south. The fragile alliances needed to be nurtured, the battered armies reorganized, the winter storms accounted for. And always, lurking beneath every discussion, was the question of Jon's parentage and Daenerys's claim. He gave a reluctant nod. "Let's go, then. I'll send word to Sansa and Arya. We'll convene in the Solar." The old solar in Winterfell was a small, round tower chamber with a single long table and windows that overlooked the courtyard. After the ruin of the castle during the Ironborn attacks and the subsequent repairs, the walls were newly reinforced. Still, a chill wind rattled the shutters, reminding them that winter had not yet let go of the north, even if the greatest threat had passed. They gathered there in the gray half-light of late afternoon. Daenerys arrived in a thick cloak, her silver hair braided back, face still pale from the earlier blow she'd taken. Ser Barristan Selmy had survived the Great War as well and stood respectfully at her side. The old knight's posture was proud but subdued. Grey Worm, stoic and unsmiling as ever, accompanied her too, though his face bore fresh lines of grief. Many Unsullied had fallen in the battle, and Missandei of Noth had been among the first to find him afterward. Heartbreak etched into her features. They had lost dear friends. Sansa entered with Arya, both of them strong in their differing ways. Sansa with her poised leadership, Arya with her quiet watchfulness. Bran was wheeled in by a young servant. He said nothing, only watched with that distant, knowing gaze that unnerved even Ned from time to time. Jon stood near the table, waiting. Ned took a place beside him, tension thrumming through his body like a drawn bowstring. At last, Daenerys inclined her head and set her hands on the table's edge. "I know we are tired and battered," she began, her voice resonating in the hush. "We've won the battle for the living. Thanks to you all, the Night King is no more. But war is not over. Cersei Lannister remains on the Iron Throne, and the realm stands divided." Sansa fixed a cool gaze upon Daenerys. "We bled ourselves dry. Thousands are dead. Half the north is in ruins. Our supplies are running low, even with these last convoys from the Vale. Our armies need rest. Our people need to bury their loved ones." Daenerys nodded in acknowledgement. "Winterfell will have what it needs. My forces are yours to command to help rebuild. Yet we must also consider that the longer we delay, the stronger Cersei becomes. She has the gold from the Reach, from the spoils of Highgarden. She commands Euron Greyjoy's fleet. There are sellswords at her beck and call. If we give her a full year or two, we may find ourselves facing an even greater threat in the south." Jon folded his arms. "We can't march on King's Landing tomorrow," he said quietly. "Our men are exhausted, as Sansa says. Even the Dothraki and the Unsullied have taken heavy casualties. We need to regroup." Barristan cleared his throat. "Might I suggest a measured approach, Your Grace? We could send envoys to certain lords who might still be swayed to our side. House Tully in the Riverlands, House Arryn in the Vale, House Tyrell, though effectively broken, may still have loyal bannermen. In Dorne, there's a possibility of forging an alliance." Sansa arched a brow. "The Martells are all but wiped out. The sand snakes rose and fell. Dorne is in chaos, if the rumors are true." "We should still try," Ned said, drawing everyone's attention. "I may not have been in Westeros these past moons, but I understand the hearts of lords. The realm is weary of war. If we can present a united front, one that doesn't simply promise to replace Cersei's tyranny with a queen from across the sea, then perhaps we can avoid more bloodshed." Daenerys's violet eyes flickered, but she did not bristle. She had learned the sting of half measures and the necessity of compromise in Meereen. "I am not my father," she said quietly. "I do not wish to burn cities and enthrone myself on the bones. I will heed your counsel, Lord Stark." The old Ned Stark might have found that statement jarring, but after these many weeks at her side, he heard the sincerity in her tone. Still, it was Sansa who replied, her voice steady. "We appreciate that, Your Grace, but words must be matched with actions. The North fought for its life, and many of us remember the cruelty visited upon us by the Iron Throne, by the Lannisters, and by the Targaryens long ago. Convincing the North to march south again will not be easy." Arya, silent until now, spoke. Her tone was low, watchful. "Or we can remain behind these walls and see if the South tears itself apart. Let them fight, let them bleed. We hold the North." Jon shot her a troubled glance. "That's no solution. The South has grain, farmland, Resources. The north is nearly spent. We cannot seal ourselves away. He paused, then turned to Daenerys, his posture formal. If we're to claim the Iron Throne in the name of House Targaryen, we must show the realm a better option than Lannister rule. We can't do that if we appear to be another invader come to do as we please. A faint tension flickered at the edges of Daenerys's lips. The realm that spurned my family so viciously, the realm that cheered at the execution of my father, even if he was mad, the realm that hunted my brother and me for years. It's difficult to trust them, too. You must, Ned said gently but firmly. The realm is not only the High Lords. It's the countless ordinary folk who have no say in who sits on the throne. They deserve a just queen. Daenerys's lips parted. She glanced at Jon, then at Ned. A solemn acceptance passed through her features. Yes, they do. Bran, from his corner, spoke with that distant, echoing quality. The future of men depends on unity. The crow told me as much. His words hushed the entire group, and for a moment, an uneasy prickling sensation went up Ned's spine. He still was unsure exactly what Bran had become, some manner of green seer, or the legendary three-eyed raven. The boy knew too many things he could not possibly know. Sansa shook her head, not pressing for clarity. So, we rebuild. We gather resources, we approach potential allies, and we show the realm we are not butchers. How long will that take? We'll need to act by spring, Jon said. We can't let Cersei fortify for a year or more. Another wedding, another alliance with foreign banks or Sellsword companies, and we'll be outmatched. Grey Worm spoke in a low, measured voice. The Unsullied follow you, my queen. We will do as you command, but we are fewer now. The survivors are strong. They will fight to the end, but we lack our old numbers. Daenerys inclined her head, acknowledging the heavy losses. We press forward cautiously. Barristan, you will write to the lords we believe might join us. Lord Stark, with your permission, we can affix your seal as well. One from the north, one from House Targaryen. That may lend our words more weight. Ned glanced at Sansa. She gave an almost imperceptible nod, yielding to his judgment. Ned said. Let us write those letters. I'll do all I can to reassure old allies that I stand behind the alliance with you, your grace. Barristan nodded. As you say, my queen. Shall I dispatch riders or ravens at first light? Daenerys hesitated. She wanted to do something more direct, Ned could tell. She yearned to deal with Cersei immediately, but so much had changed in Daenerys over the months. She had seen how precipitous decisions could unravel entire cities. She took a breath. Yes, do it, and we'll have to ensure that once the letters are sent, we provide enough evidence of our sincerity. If any lords accept, we treat them with respect. If any remain loyal to the Lannisters, we must decide carefully how to respond. Jon let out a slow breath. That's our next step then. Meanwhile, Sansa can see to the repairs in the north. We can begin fortifying supply lines along the King's Road. If we intend to march south, the King's Road must be secured. Sansa folded her hands in front of her. House Manderley at White Harbor will be crucial, along with the Glovers, the Serwins, the Locks. We have to mend fences with those who turned away after the Red Wedding. The name Stark still carries weight in the north, but it's fractured. The mention of the Red Wedding made Ned's stomach tighten. Robb's betrayal and death, orchestrated by Roose Bolton and Walder Frey, was still a searing wound. The knowledge that his eldest son was lost, never to return, filled him with a grief he could barely speak. But he forced it down. This was the world they had to navigate, no matter how battered. Let us hope they heed the call, he managed quietly. Daenerys tapped her fingers on the table as if steeling herself for something. At length she addressed Jon directly. You have a claim to the throne equal or stronger than mine. Stronger, Bran interrupted in that distant tone, prompting a glare from Arya. He is the true-born son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. Daenerys dipped her chin. Yes, that. Yet you have pledged yourself to me, or at least to my cause. In the eyes of many that may be enough. But if the realm learns of your parentage. Jon's gaze dropped. I have no desire for the throne, Daenerys. I only want peace for the realm. You are the one who has gathered forces, freed cities, and hatched dragons. The people know you. I've seen what you can do for them. If I can aid you, if I can ensure the North stands with you, that's all I want. A flicker of relief crossed her face, but also sadness. It may not be so simple once rumors spread. People might rally behind you as a male heir, or as the son of Rhaegar, or as a Stark. Already there are whispers that you rode a dragon in the battle, that the fire does not burn you. You might well be a living sign of Targaryen destiny. Jon clenched his jaw. Let them whisper. I'll not fan those flames. Ned listened, uneasy. He knew how quickly rumors about lineage could feed the ambitions of lords with their own axes to grind. He and Daenerys and Jon might speak politely here in Winterfell's solar, but once letters crisscrossed the realm, cunning or desperate lords would see an opening. Already, Ned could imagine them, the Vale lords remembering how Jon Arryn had fostered Ned and Robert, the Stormlands uncertain after the deaths of Stannis and Renly, the Riverlands reeling from the Frey's betrayal. The Iron Islands commanded by the chaotic Euron Greyjoy, who might choose to support any side for his own gain. The threat of civil war loomed once again, only months after the undead had threatened to devour everyone. Then it is decided, Daenerys said, her voice cutting through the tense hush. We rebuild for now. We gather allies. We remain in the north through the worst of winter. Once the snows recede enough for armies to march, we head south. Hopefully, we do so with letters of friendship rather than swords alone. A wave of exhaustion passed through each of them. No one argued further. The plan was not perfect, but it was the only feasible path. The alternative was rushing at Cersei with battered forces or fracturing the realm by announcing 2 Targaryen claimants. War would be inevitable, but they might shape it into something far less catastrophic if they proceeded with caution. One by one, the lords and knights filed out, returning to the duties of clearing the dead, organizing supply lines, and consoling the living. Ned lingered behind, noticing how Daenerys sank into a chair once the room mostly emptied. Jon placed a hand on her shoulder. For a moment, they looked at each other with the tenderness of 2 souls who had stood on the brink of death together. Ned cleared his throat and turned away, affording them some privacy. He gazed out the narrow window. Snow drifted down, softening the battered courtyard below. Finally, Daenerys spoke, her voice half wry. I never thought I'd see so much snow that didn't melt at the sight of Dragonfire. Jon gave a faint chuckle, though it was weary. Welcome to the north. Even Dragonfire isn't enough to thaw it. Ned listened as their conversation shifted to a hushed exchange, Daenerys leaning her forehead against Jon's. He heard murmurs of guilt, of sorrow for those who had died, of gratitude that the living had survived. Then, gently, Daenerys mentioned the child she had lost years ago, her faith that she could not bear children, and how Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion had become her only children. Ned closed his eyes, feeling the intimacy of their grief. He let them speak without interruption until they fell quiet, exhausted by the weight of the day. He turned back to them. Rest, he said kindly. Both of you. This is only the beginning, but we can allow ourselves this moment to breathe. They exchanged tired nods. Then Ned parted from them, leaving the solar and making his way toward his old bedchamber, long since ravaged by the castle's earlier fall and newly rebuilt. It felt both familiar and alien. Over the next fortnight, Winterfell found a semblance of order in the aftermath of the Great War. It wasn't easy, the snows kept falling, though less fiercely than before. Farmers from the outskirts brought in precious supplies of grain and livestock, hearts lifted by the knowledge that the dead would no longer prowl at night. Ravens were dispatched south, bearing letters sealed with both the Stark dire wolf and the Targaryen dragon sigil. Daenerys made frequent appearances in the courtyard, speaking to the people, helping with repairs, personally seeing to some of the wounded. Jon and Ned joined her, bridging the gap between the suspicious Northmen and the Dragon Queen. Sansa organized a grand communal funeral for the fallen. Corpses were gathered, those that could be identified and those that remained unknown. The largest pyres burned along the outskirts of the godwood, their flames rising high into the pale sky. The crackle of fire echoed in the hush, and so many families wept or stood in silent shock. Daenerys shed tears for Jorah Mormont, placing a single purple flower atop his pyre before the flames consumed him. The Mormont sisters, Lyanna among them, having fought bravely, lit their own smaller pyre for those of Bear Island who had fallen. Lyanna Mormont herself had nearly died if not for the quick interventions of a maester, but she survived, battered and pale, an unbreakable girl lady in her own right. Ned stood by the main pyre, cold biting at his face. He held a torch for the men of House Stark who had died. Tears blurred his vision as he thought of all the young men who'd marched under his banner once upon a time, who might now be lost to this final conflagration. Robb's ghost hovered in his mind, though Robb's bones had been lost at the twins. The memory was enough to make Ned's hand shake as he lowered the torch, igniting the oil-soaked wood. Flames rushed up in a roar of orange and gold, and for a moment he imagined he saw Catelyn's face in the swirling sparks. The pyres burned through the night. Dawn rose on a Winterfell blackened by soot but alive. The living stumbled about bleary-eyed but forced themselves to carry on. Horses needed feeding, walls needed mending, watch rotations needed organization. Daenerys kept her dragons on a short leash. Drogon circled overhead at times, letting out echoing roars that reminded all who saw him that the queen's power was far from spent. Rhaegal, not fully recovered from the wounds inflicted by the Whites, mostly perched along the castle's higher battlements, occasionally letting Jon approach to run a careful hand over his scaled flank. Tyrion was lost months past, turned into a white and ultimately destroyed beyond the wall, but the sorrow lingered in Daenerys' eyes whenever she looked at the other two. As the second week passed, replies from various lords trickled in. Raven by raven, Barristan read them aloud in the Great Hall. The Vale, led by the boy Lord Robert Arryn and managed by Lord Grafton of Gulltown and various regents, expressed cautious willingness to meet. They had lost little in the Great War, hidden behind the Bloody Gate, but the stories of the dead's defeat impressed them. They would consider supporting Daenerys Targaryen if guaranteed trade privileges and security from Lannister revenge. In the Riverlands, Edmure Tully, recently freed by a stroke of fortune or perhaps overlooked by the phrase once Arya Stark had begun exacting her quiet vengeance, was trying to rally what remained of House Tully's vassals. He wrote that the Riverlands were exhausted from war but open to forging an alliance with House Stark and the new Targaryen queen, especially if it meant justice for the Freys and the Lannisters who had ravaged their land. Dorne remained uncertain, with no clear ruling family after the deaths of Prince Doran, his son Trystane, and the Sand Snakes. Various Dornish houses jockeyed for power. A short note arrived from one Lady Namella Toland suggesting she might be receptive to an envoy if certain conditions, likely marriage alliances or promises of autonomy, were met. It was not a firm commitment, but at least a door was cracked open. The Stormlands, still reeling from Stannis' defeat and Renly's death, had no official reply. A scattered cluster of minor lords bickered over the Stormlands' inheritance. One rumor placed Gendry, Robert Baratheon's bastard, somewhere among them, but that was unconfirmed. Barristan noted that forging an alliance there might be the hardest task. The Reach was the trickiest, with House Tyrell effectively destroyed, Margaery, Loras, and their father all dead. Cersei had seized Highgarden. Randall Tarly was gone, Samwell Tarly having joined the Night's Watch. A few lesser Tyrell cousins survived, but they lacked the influence to rally the entire region. Meanwhile, many smaller houses had bent the knee to Cersei out of fear or necessity. The letter that arrived was from a minor lord hoping for a better suitor to claim Highgarden, but offering no promise of immediate loyalty. The Westerlands were firmly under Lannister control, so no letters came from that quarter. As for the Iron Islands, Euron Greyjoy commanded the main fleet allied with Cersei. Yara Greyjoy's status was unclear, though rumors said she'd escaped or been freed by Theon. Perhaps that could provide an inroad. With these scattered threads, Daenerys and Ned convened a new war council. News had arrived that the cold might persist for many months. Though the others were gone, winter did not simply vanish overnight. The roads would be treacherous until the first thaw. They debated sending small diplomatic parties to each region, risking bandits and Lannister agents. Time was short, though, and an overland journey was perilous. Yet the alternative, waiting idly, risked letting Cersei fill the vacuum with her own agents. Perhaps we can sail, suggested Grey Worm. We have some ships left from our crossing. Fewer now, but enough to send an envoy down the eastern coast, maybe to Gulltown first, then Dorne. We can approach the Stormlands from the sea. Jon frowned. Sailing in winter is dangerous, but it might still be faster than traveling by land. Daenerys looked at Ned. Would you consider leading one of these envoys, Lord Stark? You have a reputation for honor. The lords might open their gates if they know you come in peace. Ned felt a pang, leaving Winterfell again so soon after reclaiming it. Part of him longed to stay within these walls, to help Sansa rebuild their home, to watch Arya's growth, to speak more with Bran. Yet, the realm's fate teetered on the edge. I will do what must be done, he replied, inclining his head. Though I wonder if my presence is best served in the north, mending old wounds. Or perhaps your presence, your grace, would be more effective. If these lords see you in person, they may realize you are not a monster. Barristan shook his head. It's dangerous to take the queen on separate missions with so many assassins in the wind. We have uncovered more than one attempt on her life, even here in Winterfell. Ned's jaw tightened. Indeed, the attempts had not ceased after the Great War. One assassin had been caught trying to poison the communal stew. Another, disguised as a wandering bard, had crept near the dragons with a crossbow and dragonglass-tipped bolt, clearly lacking understanding that dragonglass was for whites, not dragons. Each time, the threat was contained, but they remained vigilant. Jon studied the map spread across the table. We can't all be scattered. We need Daenerys here to reassure the North that we aren't deserting them after the victory. And if I may speak plainly, we need your presence here as well, Ned. The North is more likely to accept Daenerys if you are by her side. Ned was about to reply when Sansa interjected. We are forgetting that the Vale is close by. With the snows, it's still a difficult journey, but not impossible. If the Vale declares for us, that secures our flank and might provide more soldiers or resources. Winterfell can focus on recovering. Daenerys glanced at the table. Then perhaps we sail south from White Harbor to Dorne while another party heads into the Vale. A third could attempt the Riverlands. If we coordinate our arrivals to happen nearly simultaneously, Cersei will have less time to sabotage each mission individually. Barristan nodded thoughtfully. We do risk dividing our forces, but if each envoy is small and travels discreetly, it might be safer. Jon looked to Ned. I can head to the Riverlands. Edmure Tully is our uncle, in a way. If we do it quietly, we might cross the neck before the deep snows block the road. My face may not be immediately recognized as Targaryen to those who don't know the truth. Sansa piped up. If anyone from the Freys remains, you're likely to face hostility. But House Frey is scattered. Arya saw to that. Arya's expression darkened. Walder Frey and many of his kin paid for the Red Wedding. Others fled. The twins might still hold a handful of men, but it's no fortress anymore. Daenerys pressed a hand to her temple, as if the weight of all these threads threatened to overwhelm her. Very well, let's do this carefully. Grey Worm, you will select a small detachment of Unsullied to accompany me if I go to White Harbor, from where we can sail. Barristan Missandei, you will come as well. If that is your wish, we'll attempt to reach Dorne by sea, then proceed with negotiations. Meanwhile, Jon Snow can quietly lead a group to the Riverlands, meet Edmure Tully, gather support. Then, if feasible, we look toward the Stormlands or the Reach. Lord Stark and Lady Sansa remain in Winterfell to secure the north and open lines of communication with the Vale. Is that acceptable? Ned paused, glancing at Sansa. She gave a small nod, though he read uncertainty in her eyes. She had just spent so long trying to reclaim the North from Bolton treachery, Ironborn raids, and the Lannisters' shadow. Letting him remain by her side might actually strengthen her hold. It is, Ned said softly. As you command, Your Grace. The North will be ready to aid you in spring, or sooner if the snows lighten. Sansa cleared her throat. One more thing. The Vale might accept me as an envoy, seeing as I was once betrothed to their little lord, or so Peter Baelish had arranged. But that is all overshadowed by what transpired. Still, I can send a raven to Sweet Robin or to Lord Royce. Perhaps they'll at least listen. We can arrange a meeting at Moat Cailin or at the Gates of the Moon. We'll see. Arya gave an almost predatory smile. If Lord Royce or any of the Vale Lords think to threaten you, they'll find the North has teeth. Daenerys ended the council with a final nod. Plans were set in motion. Over the following days, preparations moved swiftly despite the obstacles. Ships were readied at White Harbor, supplies packed for the journeys. Jon selected a small retinue, Tormund Giantsbane, a few trusted northern bannermen, and Gendry, whom they'd found in the camp after the battle, forging dragonglass weapons. Gendry had no desire to remain idle, and Jon insisted that a skilled smith could be invaluable. Gendry also knew the roads of the Riverlands to some extent, having traveled them with the Brotherhood without banners. The day of departure arrived sooner than expected. The snows eased, the winds quieted, granting a small window for travel. Ned stood atop Winterfell's ramparts, watching Jon, Tormund, and the others ride out. They led a small train of mules carrying provisions. All wore heavy furs, and the Stark banner fluttered from one of their spears. "Farewell, my son," Ned murmured, though Jon was well out of earshot. "May the gods guide you." Daenerys was to leave within a few days, heading east to White Harbor. She spent that interim scouring the skies on Drogon or Rhaegal, testing her dragon's readiness for the journey. Ned found himself uneasy at the sight of her taking flight. Each time she soared off the battlements, memories of the Targaryens' old conquest flickered in his mind, but he forced the dread away. Daenerys was not Aegon the Conqueror. Her aim was not blind destruction. Still, the power in her command was fearsome. Sansa and Arya threw themselves into Winterfell's renewal. Ned followed Sansa through storerooms, counting what little remained of the harvest. The war with the dead had delayed winter preparations, and the realm's fields had withered beneath early frosts. But Sansa had a keen mind for logistics, gleaned from her experiences in King's Landing and the Vale. She directed the distribution of rations, negotiated with traveling merchants. Arya, on the other hand, spent her days quietly training with the castle guards, or practicing archery on the rampart. Sometimes Ned glimpsed her slipping away into the corridors at odd hours, as if on secret errands. He suspected she had a network of informants, though she never spoke of it. Bran rarely left his chamber, though on certain nights, Ned spotted ravens flocking to the windowsill. The boy, and he was still a boy in Ned's eyes, though changed, spent hours in silent reverie, gazing into the hearth flames or staring blankly at his carved weirwood staff. Ned tried to speak with him a few times, but Bran's answers were cryptic. "You did as you must," was all he would often say, or "the time for illusions is over." Ned's stomach churned, wondering if Bran knew every secret in Ned's soul. The mention of illusions echoed the many years Ned had lied to protect Jon. At least that burden was lifted, if not resolved. At last, Daenerys's departure day came. A hush fell upon the courtyard as she prepared to mount Drogon. Grey Worm and a small contingent of Unsullied would travel overland to White Harbor, while Daenerys flew ahead with Regal by her side. Drogon's massive form cast a long shadow across the yard. The dragon hissed, steam curling from its nostrils. Daenerys ascended by means of a rope ladder they had fashioned for stable mounting. She wore thick leathers, her silver hair bound tight. Beside her, on Regal, rode Barristan Selmy, a precarious arrangement, but the old knight had shown an unexpected knack for staying astride once Daenerys taught him the basics. He claimed it was simpler than jousting. Ned stepped forward, accompanied by Sansa, Arya, and a small cluster of northern lords. "May the winds favor you, your grace," he said. "We will pray for your safe journey. White Harbor awaits you." Daenerys nodded, her expression pensive. "I leave Winterfell in your care, Lord Stark. We've come a long way together." "That we have," Ned said softly, thinking of how he had once expected to die on the steps of the Great September and how fate had led him across the sea to protect the last Targaryen. "I pray that your efforts in Dorne bear fruit. We'll do our part here." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Thank you for everything. I know I've demanded much of you, and you've given more than I had any right to request." Ned shook his head. "We all serve the realm, your grace." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Then she urged Drogon into the air. The great beast roared, wings beating a thunderous rhythm. Snow swirled beneath the gust of wind as they ascended. Regal followed, Barristan clinging to the saddle. The entire courtyard shielded their faces from the blast of powdery snow. Within moments, the dragons were wheeling high above the battlements, their silhouettes cutting across the pale winter sun. Then they soared eastward, disappearing beyond the horizon. Ned exhaled, feeling as though a gale had swept through and taken some measure of tension with it. Or perhaps it only replaced that tension with a fresh layer of uncertainty. He glanced at Sansa. She drew her fur cloak tighter, lips pursed. "So many times I've seen queens and kings parade forth," she murmured. "But never on dragonback." Arya gave a short laugh. "Better than wedding pageantry, I suppose." They parted ways. Sansa returned to her work while Arya slipped off, presumably to the training yard. Ned found himself climbing the stairs to the top of the walls, seeking a moment of solitude. From that vantage, he could see across the white fields to the distant tree line. Already, the tracks of Grey Worm's company stretched out, soon to be blanketed by new snowfall. The scale of the realm's challenges pressed heavily on him. For all they had done, ridding the world of the Night King, forging a fragile alliance of North and Targaryen, they still faced the question of Cersei Lannister and the Iron Throne. And beneath that lay the deeper question, how would the realm endure once the dust of war finally settled? Time churned onward. Winterfell became a hub of small but vital decisions. Sansa wrote daily to the Vale, eventually receiving word from Lord Royce, who proposed a meeting at the Gates of the Moon once the pass was clear. Ned oversaw the forging of new alliances with lesser northern houses that had been on the fence or that had lost faith after Robb's demise. One by one, the lords pledged anew, offering meager but heartfelt support to House Stark and, by extension, the Targaryen alliance. Food was still scarce, but they rationed carefully, determined to last until the first break of spring. Every so often, news arrived by Raven from Jon or Daenerys. Jon's messages came in short, practical lines. Reach the outskirts of the riverlands. Freys scattered. Tully banners beginning to rally. We'll meet Edmure at Riverrun. Fighting pockets of outlaws. Little rest. Gendry forging again. Morale uncertain but pressing forward. Jon Snow. Daenerys's messages were penned by Missandei in elegant script. We have reached White Harbor without incident. Ships await. Lady Manderly is uncertain but sees the benefit of siding with the North. Departing on the tide for Sunspear if it still stands. Dragons weather the cold poorly but adapt. Pray for favorable winds and swift negotiations. Daenerys Storeborn. Ned read these letters with a mixture of hope and concern. The journey to Dorne would be long and perilous, and who knew what state that southern kingdom was truly in after the Sand Snake's downfall. As for Jon in the Riverlands, outlaws and broken men prowled the fields. The end of the Great War had not ended old grudges. And then there was King's Landing, quiet for the moment. Cersei was rumored to be consolidating her hold, rebuilding the city guard, forging new alliances among lesser lords who feared the Targaryen return. No direct confrontation had begun, but Ned sensed it was only a matter of time. The realm was like a charged thundercloud, waiting for the next strike. He did his best to push these thoughts aside as winter nights grew longer. In rare stolen moments, he visited the Godwood with Sansa and Arya. There, the ancient weirwood stood, red leaves trembling in the frosty air, its carved face older than memory. Ned knelt at the trunk, recalling the countless times he had come here for guidance or solace. He prayed for wisdom, for peace. He prayed for Catelyn and Robb, for the mother and son he would never see again in this world. He prayed for Bran's healing, for Arya's happiness, for Sansa's resilience, for Rickon's lost life. If the rumors were true, Rickon had been slain by Ramsay Bolton. He prayed for Jon, for Daenerys, for all who sought a better tomorrow. The god would remain silent, save for the rustle of wind through leaves. Sometimes Ned thought the carved face frowned at him, or perhaps it was just the flicker of torchlight. He rose and returned to the tasks at hand, mindful that the realm's future did not wait for prayers alone. Weeks passed. Snowdrifts piled along Winterfell's walls. At times, the gloom threatened to smother everyone, but Sansa kept them going. She organized a small festival for the surviving children in the courtyard, distributing bits of sweetbread. Arya, surprisingly, helped amuse them with a juggling act she must have learned on her travels. The children's laughter was a fragile spark of life in the endless white. Ned watched from the sidelines, heart aching at the memory of how young his own children once were, how swiftly the tides of war had forced them to grow up. Word came from the Vale that the mountain passes were somewhat navigable. Sansa decided to journey there in person, leaving Arya behind in Winterfell. The plan was for Sansa to meet Lord Royce and young Robert Arryn at the Gates of the Moon. She promised to return as soon as she forged a more tangible alliance. Arya insisted on accompanying her, but Ned advised one Stark remained behind to hold Winterfell. Arya bristled at first, but eventually agreed, albeit grudgingly. So, on a cold, clear morning, Sansa departed with a small escort of Stark men, including Brienne of Tarth, who had sworn herself to Sansa's service after the war. Ned stood at the gates to bid his daughter farewell. She wore a cloak lined with wolf fur, her red hair tucked beneath a hood. Despite the frost on her lashes, there was fire in her eyes, a determination that had been tested in the crucible of captivity and heartbreak. "I'll bring back good news," Sansa said, voice trembling with the chill. "The Vale needs us as much as we need them. Together we can stand against the Lannisters." Ned pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Be safe, daughter." She inclined her head, mounted her horse, and rode out. The wind carried away the sound of hooves in a swirl of white powder. Back inside, Winterfell felt emptier still. Arya roamed the corridors, restless. Bran remained in his own world of visions. Ned found himself consumed by the tasks Sansa left behind, supply ledgers, negotiations with local traders, overseeing the leftover dragoglass for forging. In quiet hours, he would pause in the library, reading old records of Targaryen kings and queens, hoping to glean some insight that might help Daenerys avoid the traps of her lineage. He read of Jaehaerys the Conciliator, who had brought peace after the cruelties of Maegor the Cruel. He read of Rhaenys and Visenya, who had accompanied Aegon in his conquest, forging alliances with some realms, destroying others. The tapestry of Targaryen history was woven in blood and fire, but it was not without pockets of wisdom, of mercy. It gave him hope that Daenerys could forge a new path if she stayed vigilant. And so time dragged, each day shaped by the frigid hush of winter. Ravens arrived intermittently. Jon's expedition had reached Riverrun, reuniting with Edmure Tully. Some fighting persisted against rogue Freemen and Lannister patrols near Harrenhal. The Tully banners, once scattered, now began to assemble. Edmure offered pledges of loyalty to House Stark and to Daenerys Targaryen, but stressed the Riverlands could ill afford another brutal war. They would fight if they must, yet they prayed for a negotiated settlement. Daenerys reached Sunspear. Much of the castle stood deserted, with only a skeleton garrison present. House Martell was long gone, the Sand Snakes decimated. Local lords, including House Toland, House Ironwood, and House Dane, were engaged in endless squabbles. Daenerys worked tirelessly to gather them using a combination of diplomacy and the awe of her dragons. Some seemed willing to pledge support if it meant independence from King's Landing. Others demanded the Queen personally come to them, which Daenerys did, flying from holdfast to holdfast, forging uneasy alliances. It was slow going. Sansa's envoy to the Gates of the Moon encountered heavy snowfall, forcing them to shelter in the foothills. Lord Royce was said to be on his way. No word from young Robert Arryn yet. Morale was stable, but caution was high. One crisp morning, the monotony of Winterfell's routine shattered when a horn sounded from the outer ramparts. Ned was in the courtyard, inspecting repairs, when the alarm reached his ears. He spun toward the gates, heart-lurching. The watchman cried, "Riders from the south, my lord," bearing the Lannister lion and the royal banner. A hush fell over the courtyard. Soldiers rushed to defensive positions, some grabbing spears, others notching arrows. Could Cersei have sent an army? But the horns did not blare an alarm for a large force, just a small group. Ned barked orders to hold positions while he strode toward the main gate. Arya joined him, hand on the hilt of needle. Her face was set in that implacable calm that unsettled many men. When the gates opened, a dozen riders entered, cloaked in heavy fur, the gold of the Lannister banner draped across their saddlebags. At their head rode a figure in black and crimson. As they drew closer, Ned recognized the face under the hood, Tyrion Lannister, the dwarf known as the Imp. He had disappeared from King's Landing months ago, rumored to have joined Daenerys. Yet here he was, wearing a sardonic half-smile that belied the tension in his gaze. Ned tensed, memories flooding back. Tyrion Lannister, the man who'd once been accused of trying to kill Bran, then found innocent. The cunning mind behind so many of King's Landing's intrigues. And apparently he had allied with Daenerys in Essos, a detail Ned recalled from rumor. But why arrive here, at Winterfell, under a Lannister banner? Tyrion dismounted, wincing at the cold. A handful of Lannister retainers followed suit, their expressions wary as they found themselves surrounded by Northmen ready for a fight. "Lord Stark," Tyrion called, voice echoing across the yard. "I come in peace, believe it or not." Arya narrowed her eyes. "That's a bold claim for a Lannister." Tyrion raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I no longer serve Cersei. My banner is not the lion alone, but the three-headed dragon as well. I bring a message of dire importance. The Queen in King's Landing has plans. Plans that threaten all we've fought to protect." Ned felt the swirl of confusion from the men around him. So Tyrion Lannister was still loyal to Daenerys. But why appear here, flying the lion? "Speak quickly," Ned said, keeping a tight rein on his own men, who eyed Tyrion with deep suspicion. Tyrion cleared his throat, pulling off his gloves to warm his hands at a brazier near the gate. Snowflakes clung to his hair and stubbled cheeks. "Cersei sent me a raven, summoning me to King's Landing for a parley. She claimed she wished to discuss a truce, to avoid further war. Like a fool, I went, hoping to glean some advantage for Daenerys." Arya spat. "That's madness. Cersei's cunning enough to spring a trap." Tyrion gave a rueful grin. "Indeed, but she didn't kill me. She's too savvy for that. She knows Daenerys might burn the city to ash in retaliation. Instead, she feigned courtesy. She spoke of alliances with Essos, new shipments of wildfire, debts repaid to the Iron Bank. She's building something piece by piece. I don't know all the details, but she let slip that Euron Greyjoy is ferrying sellswords from Essos in vast numbers. The Golden Company, if I had to guess. She seeks to strike swiftly once winter wanes, aiming to quell any attempt Daenerys makes to claim the throne. Ned's thoughts raced. The Golden Company was a formidable army of exiled knights and mercenaries, supposedly loyal to old Targaryen pretenders in times past. But coin ruled their loyalty now. If Cersei had enough gold to buy them, she could field thousands of disciplined cells words. "So you came here to warn us?" Tyrion nodded, blowing on his cold fingers. "I parted ways with Cersei as soon as I realized her cunning. I suspect she let me go because she believes I can sow discord among Daenerys' allies. Or perhaps she underestimates me. Regardless, time is short. If the Golden Company arrives in the Crownlands or the Stormlands, they could move north quickly once the road's clear." Arya's hand tightened on Needle's hilt. "We can't sit idle, then. Jon's in the Riverlands. Daenerys is in Dorne, Sansa in the Vale. We're all scattered." Tyrion studied Arya for a moment, then turned to Ned. "I came to Winterfell because I trust your sense of honor. We have a chance to unify faster than Cersei expects, but we must move swiftly. Daenerys is forging alliances in Dorne. Jon's rallying the Riverlands. If you can consolidate the north, bring the Vale to heel, we could present a united front come spring. That might dissuade the Golden Company from attacking outright or at least hamper their progress." Ned took a slow breath, the weight of leadership pressing on his shoulders once more. The realm had not even begun to recover from the war against the dead, and now another maelstrom loomed. "Let's speak in the hall," he said at last. "Warm yourselves. We'll decide our course of action." Under the guarded eyes of the Northmen, Tyrion and his escort entered Winterfell. A hush followed them as the castle's occupants recognized the arrival of a Lannister, the one rumored to be in Daenerys' service. Ned led them to the great hall where the fires blazed. Tyrion quickly settled near the largest hearth, shaking off the cold. Arya hovered nearby, arms crossed. She did not trust Tyrion, though Ned suspected that was simply her default stance toward any Lannister. Tyrion, for his part, seemed aware of the tension but kept his wit measured and polite. Over a meal of hot broth and crusty bread, Tyrion laid out all he had gleaned in King's Landing. Cersei's coffers were apparently bolstered by the gold plundered from Highgarden. Rumors suggested that she had struck a new deal with the Iron Bank, guaranteeing further loans to pay for mercenaries. Euron Greyjoy was scouring the seas for fresh ships, though rumor also had it that Yara Greyjoy had retaken some of the Iron Islands in his absence. In short, King's Landing was not standing still. The Game of Thrones was in full swing again, and Cersei intended to be the last one standing. Ned pinched the bridge of his nose, the stress compounding. "We can't wait. But we also can't blindly march south in winter, battered as we are. That's why you must unify," Tyrion emphasized. "If you can gather the north, the Vale, and the Riverlands under a single banner by the time the snows melt, Daenerys may return from Dorne with fresh allies. Together, you could challenge or even surpass the Golden Company. Meanwhile, we might negotiate with the Iron Islands or sow discord among Cersei's ranks. She thrives on fear and weakness, but if we show a united front, some of her supporters might waver." Arya spoke quietly. "You speak of cunning and trickery. Are we sure we want to descend to that level?" Tyrion shrugged, swirling the dregs of his broth. "Wars are rarely won by pure honesty alone, my lady. But fear not, I've no intention of betraying your father's code of honor. We can simply use the truth, Cersei's cruelty, her proven deceit, to shift hearts and minds." Ned considered. He had never favored such manipulations, but time and again, war had shown him that straightforward valor did not always prevail. If the realm was to avoid a catastrophic bloodbath, cunning might be as necessary as swords. "Very well," he said, folding his hands. "We've already begun forging alliances. Sansa is in the Vale as we speak. Jon is in the Riverlands, Daenerys in Dorne. We must expedite this. Could you assist us with the Vale? Or do you have enough familiarity with them?" Tyrion tilted his head. "I've visited the area under less pleasant circumstances. Catelyn Stark once took me there as a prisoner. But I do know Lord Royce. He's a pragmatic man. If I speak on behalf of Daenerys, perhaps I can reinforce Sansa's efforts. That is, if Lady Sansa will accept my company. She might blame me for the ills befalling House Stark in the past." Ned frowned, remembering how Tyrion had once been at odds with Catelyn. "I suspect Sansa is wise enough to judge you by your current deeds, not your old allegiances." "Very well. If you can make it through the mountain passes without succumbing to the snows, you may find her at the gates of the moon. That's likely where the negotiations will take place." Tyrion offered a short bow. "Then I'll depart within a few days, once my men and horses have rested." I appreciate your hospitality, Lord Stark. A memory of the old days flickered through Ned's mind, how he had been suspicious of Tyrion in King's Landing, how events had spiraled so that Tyrion ended up imprisoned by Catelyn. Life had a strange way of weaving paths together. We have common cause now, he said. We'll do what we must for the realm. That night, Ned stood once more at the battlements, gazing at the dark sky. The flicker of torches in the courtyard below illuminated the swirling snow. Tyrion's arrival felt like a turning point, a summons to the next chapter of the war for the throne. The specter of the White Walkers had been banished, but the living world had returned to its old habits. Could they avoid another spiral of destruction? Could the promise of dragons and wolves united hold? When Ned returned to his chamber, he found a scroll that had arrived by Raven in his absence. He unrolled it, scanning the contents. Lord Stark, I have reached the seat of House Toland and negotiations proceed apace. Houses Ironwood and Dane express cautious support. Dorne chafes under any notion of bending the knee, but they recall Elia Martell's murder at the hands of the Lannisters. I believe we can unite them through promises of self-governance and retribution against Cersei. The dragons help fewer men doubt my resolve when they see Drogon perched atop their keep. We must move swiftly in the coming moon turns. Expect us back in Westeros's heartlands by early spring if all goes well. Tell Lord Stark, I will keep my word. This realm needs healing, not another tyrant. I will do what I must to secure just peace. Daenerys. Ned exhaled, setting the letter on his desk. Outside, the wind moaned through the parapets, a reminder of the harsh northern nights. He closed his eyes, letting the quiet envelop him. For a moment, he remembered Lyanna's face, her dying request that he protect her child. Jon had grown into a leader, forging alliances with Targaryens and freeing the North from the undead. The secret was out, but rather than tearing them all apart, it had forged a bond with Daenerys Targaryen. Now the realm teetered on the edge of another war. Ned prayed that this time the living would find a better way through mercy, unity, and the shared memory of standing against the darkness. Morning came. The snows had lightened and the faint winter sun cast pale beams over Winterfell's yard. Tyrion's retinue prepared to depart for the Vale, joined by a small escort of northern riders to ensure they avoided bandits. The dwarf took Ned's hand in a firm shake before mounting his steed. Wish me luck, Lord Stark. Let's hope Lady Sansa doesn't toss me into the Ares sky cells upon sight. Ned managed a small smile. She won't. She's become quite the stateswoman. But be mindful. The Vale Lords can be proud and stubborn. If you can talk them into supporting Daenerys, it'll be a major step forward. Tyrion's mismatched eyes glinted. I've always liked a challenge. With that, he spurred his horse onward, leading his people out the gate. Ned and Arya watched them vanish into the snowy road that wound south. Then Arya murmured, "We're placing a lot of trust in a Lannister." Ned nodded. "We are. But we're also placing trust in a Targaryen, in the Martells, in lords from every corner of the realm who once fought each other. If we can unite after the horrors we've seen, there might be hope." Arya's expression flickered as though she struggled to reconcile her thirst for vengeance with the new reality. But something softened in her eyes. "All right, father," she said quietly. "If you believe it's possible, then I will try to believe too." Days bled into one another. The crisp air carried rumors of minor skirmishes in the Riverlands, news of the Vale's slow negotiations with Sansa, and the occasional whispered gossip from King's Landing. Ned wrote his own letters urging older northern bannermen to rally behind the Targaryen alliance. Some responded with cautious acceptance, others with reluctant loyalty. No one wanted more war, but the Lannister name was despised enough that many were willing to follow Ned's lead if it meant final justice for the Red Wedding, the Bolton's treachery, and all the North had suffered. At times, Ned felt as though he lived in a perpetual council meeting since dawn, scribbling responses, hearing from his steward about supplies, conversing with the blacksmiths about forging new arms. Arya grew restless. Twice, Ned found her practicing with the master-at-arms in a flurry of quicksilver movement. She bested him effortlessly, to his astonishment, brandishing a new level of skill. "Where did you learn that?" Ned asked quietly, though he suspected she had traveled roads he might not want to know in detail. "I had many teachers," was all Arya said, wiping sweat from her brow. A moon turn and a half later, at last, another raven arrived from Jon. "Lord Stark, Riverrun stands with us. Edmure Tully has sworn his banners. Beric Dondarrion is here too, though he's lost his flaming sword powers, it seems, after the Night King's defeat. We've pacified most of the outlaws near Harrenhal. Word is Cersei is fortifying the Blackwater defenses. We must be ready by spring. I write also to say Gendry has proven invaluable. He's forging steel day and night, replacing broken swords. The men respect him. Some whispered rumors claim he might be a Baratheon if legitimized, but I've made no move in that direction. Our focus is on forging alliances, not stirring new claims. We march for the Trident soon to meet smaller houses that remain. Wish us luck. Jon. Ned clutched that letter, feeling pride in Jon's leadership. A Baratheon link through Gendry was intriguing, but indeed, that could complicate the politics if it roused Stormland loyalties. One step at a time, Ned thought. He penned a reply. Jon. We hold Winterfell. Tyrion Lannister arrived with warnings of Cersei's alliance with the Golden Company. We have sent him to Sansa in the Vale to strengthen negotiations. Daenerys is in Dorne, forging alliances. All rests on swift unification before spring. I am proud of you, my son. May the gods grant you safe passage. Eddard Stark. Another letter arrived soon thereafter from Daenerys, carried by one of her own riders, not a raven. Lord Stark. Dorne pledges men once the snows clear the passes, provided they receive guarantees of autonomy and vengeance upon the Lannisters for Elia Martell. I believe we can compromise. Dorne has always had a degree of independence. My dragons sustain me, though Regal misses Jon. If fortune smiles, we will soon head north to unite our forces. Be on guard for assassins. Word from Essos suggests smaller cells of mercenaries might slip into Westeros, financed by unknown benefactors. If you have any tidings from King's Landing, share them. In spring, I mean to confront Cersei directly, or parley if she will. But we all know how that likely ends. Until then, hold the north. We shall arrive with Dorne. Ish allies in due course. Daenerys Targaryen. Ned read it by lantern light in his solar, hearing the faint howls of winter wind beyond the window. The puzzle pieces were aligning. Dorne, the Riverlands, the Vale, the North. If Daenerys returned with a fraction of that support, they might truly stand a chance against Cersei's mercenaries. Yet no side would be unscathed if war broke out. Blood would drench the fields from the neck to the crownlands. He gazed at the candle flame, remembering Robert's rebellion, how it had begun with Rhaegar Targaryen's abduction or elopement, and ended in mass slaughter, culminating in the sack of King's Landing. Ned's father and brother had burned in the Mad King's cruelty. Lyanna died in his arms. Did history now threaten to repeat itself? Another Targaryen war. Another swirl of vengeance and ambition? He felt a presence behind him. Turning, he saw Bran in the doorway. The boy's expression was distant as usual. Father, Bran said, the word sounding almost foreign on his tongue. You fear the future. Ned cleared his throat. I do, son. Many will die if we can't settle this peaceably. Bran glided forward, leaning on his staff. But perhaps, if we stand together, fewer need die than before. He blinked, those ancient eyes flickering. I have seen glimpses of what may come. A city in flames, a queen in tears, a king kneeling among ashes. But those visions shift if people choose differently. Ned's heart lurched. You see these things? Yes, Bran said softly. I see many paths. Not all lead to ruin. The cold in the solar seemed to deepen, though Ned couldn't say if it was the weather or dread in his heart. We will do everything we can to avoid such horror. Bran nodded. Then do so, father. The future is not yet written. He turned and walked away, leaving Ned alone with the candle's flicker. Winter's grip endured, but gradually, the days lengthened. Reports arrived that the roads south were clearing. The first flocks of migrating birds were sighted, a sign that spring might be on the horizon. Tension crackled through the castle. Ned received word that Sansa's negotiations in the Vale succeeded. They were returning with a pledge of swords if Daenerys or Jon could confirm the Vale's place in the post-war realm. Soon after, Tyrion and Sansa reached Winterfell with a small retinue of Vale knights in tow, their banners fluttering a silver falcon. The men looked uneasy among the stark northern architecture, but Sansa greeted Ned with triumphant exhaustion. They said yes, she said. Or at least they said maybe, if Daenerys proves she's not a tyrant. Lord Royce was reluctant, but Tyrion helped. Robert Arryn has grown, still sickly but malleable. He wants to impress the realm. For now, we have their swords. We must show them we're worthy of their loyalty. Ned clasped her hand. You've done well, Sansa. Rest. You must be freezing. While Sansa recuperated, Tyrion wasted no time in convening with Ned to plan the next steps. Word is that the Golden Company has begun landing in the Stormlands or near Massey's Hook. Euron Greyjoy escorts them. Cersei is not waiting for the snows to melt completely. Ned sighed, scanning the battered old map. We need Daenerys and Jon to converge soon or they risk being cut off. If the Golden Company secures the Rose Road and the Crownlands, we'll be pinned north. Tyrion nodded grimly. We must hope Daenerys completed her alliance with Dorne and that Jon can muster the Riverlands to march swiftly. Otherwise, we'll have to fight a defensive war from the north, and that seldom goes well once resources run short. A hush fell. The dice were cast. War loomed again, but at least this time, the living dragons, wolves, and noble houses from across the realm were aligned in a common cause. The memory of the undead might have rattled some men into believing unity was possible. Ned prayed they would not forget that unity in the face of old hatreds. Within days, scouts arrived with the news. The great fleet of Daenerys Targaryen was sighted sailing up the narrow sea, flanked by Dornish warships. The dragon's sword overhead, signaling her return. Jon Snow's forces, too, moved northward from Harrenhal, aiming to meet them near the Trident. The final shape of the alliance was falling into place. Ned called a war council in Winterfell's Great Hall. Sansa, Arya, Tyrion, Lord Royce, and a handful of northern lords arrived. They debated whether to send a large host south to join Daenerys and Jon or to hold Winterfell as a fallback. In the end, they decided on a partial mobilization, enough to be significant, but leaving a garrison in the north. They would ride as soon as Daenerys arrived, linking up with her and forming a combined force to press into the Crownlands. Arya quietly volunteered to scout ahead, gather information from any potential Lannister spies or assassins. Ned hesitated to let her go, but she insisted. I've traveled that road before, Arya said. I'll slip through unnoticed. You'll need eyes and ears in the field. Sansa looked worried, but Tyrion nodded, suspecting Arya's skill might be invaluable. Ned gave his reluctant blessing, remembering that Arya had survived horrors beyond measure already. And so the stage was set. Spring's promise lay in the air, water trickling from snowdrifts, the sun lingering a fraction longer each day. Daenerys's fleet approached the Vale's coastline, planning to land near Gulltown and march to Winterfell. Jon was rumored to be crossing the crossroads near the inn at the crossroads with Riverlander support. The North readied weapons and supply wagons, forging new steel and repairing battered armor. People whispered, another war so soon? But Ned felt that perhaps this war, if carried out swiftly and decisively, would end the endless cycle of bloodshed. If Daenerys and Jon could claim the throne, if they could rule with the compassion and justice they had promised, maybe the realm would finally know peace. It was a fragile hope, but it was all they had. One bright, chilly morning, horns blasted from the outer walls. Ned climbed to the ramparts, heart pounding. On the horizon, he saw them, Daenerys Targaryen riding Drogon, flanked by Rhaegal, with a fleet of sails visible far off. A banner soared in the crisp air, a three-headed dragon on a field of black. Behind them, smaller shapes likely belonged to the Dornish outriders. The queen had come. Winterfell's gates swung wide as the dragons circled overhead. Ned hurried down to the courtyard, where knights, lords, and small folk gathered in an awestruck hush. Drogon backwinged, kicking up dust and loose snow. Daenerys leapt down, her hair streaming behind her, cloak whipped by the gust of wind from Drogon's wings. Missandei dismounted from another horse, while Grey Worm marched in at the head of a column of Unsullied. Behind them, the Dornish banners fluttered, House Dane's sword and falling star, House Ironwood's sigil, House Toland's dragon. This was the might of Dorne, gathered at last under a single purpose. Daenerys's gaze swept the courtyard. She found Ned and gave a tired but triumphant smile. It is done, she said, voice carrying in the hush. Dorne stands with us. Soon, the Riverlands and the Vale and the North will gather as one. We will march on King's Landing to confront Cersei. Let her Golden Company come. We'll show them that Westeros is not a land of petty, divided houses but a realm united. A spontaneous cheer erupted among the onlookers, though some in the crowd still wore uncertain expressions. Ned approached Daenerys, placing a hand over his heart. Welcome back, Your Grace. Winterfell stands ready. Jon Snow sends word that the River Lords are with him. He aims to link up on the King's Road in due time. Sansa has secured the Vale's pledge. Tyrion's efforts have borne fruit. Daenerys glanced up at Drogon, who roared, then took flight, flapping heavily toward the skies, Rhaegal trailing behind. We have no time to lose, she said, turning back to Ned. We'll rest for a few days, long enough to finalize our supplies. Then we march south. By the time we reach the Trident, Jon should be there with the Riverlanders. Ned bowed his head. As you command, my queen. She paused, scanning the courtyard. Where is Sansa? Inside, preparing your welcome, Ned explained. She's arranged quarters for you and your people. Daenerys nodded, though she seemed impatient to press on. We'll rest only as much as needed then. The Golden Company is already landing. We must not let them fortify the Crownlands. Ned understood. This was the moment they had been building toward since the day he'd sworn to protect Daenerys across the sea. The final confrontation with the Lannisters would soon begin, a war that might reshape Westeros once and for all. As Daenerys moved toward the keep, her retinue following, Ned exhaled. He caught Tyrion's eye in the crowd, who gave a faint nod of agreement as if to say, this is it. They had come so far since that day in King's Landing when Eddard Stark knelt on the steps of the Great September expecting death. Fate had spun them through Essos, through the Great War against the dead, through the forging of new alliances. Now, dragons perched on the walls of Winterfell, a Targaryen queen walked side by side with a Stark lord, and the realm prepared for one final trial. Ned couldn't pretend to know how it would end. All he could do was hold onto the vow he had made to protect the living, to uphold honor in a dishonorable world, and to guide Daenerys Targaryen toward a just and merciful reign. That night, they feasted sparingly, enough to welcome the newcomers without depleting Winterfell's stores. At Daenerys' side sat Ned, Tyrion, Sansa, and the Dornish representatives. Missandei translated for the few among them who spoke no common tongue. Plans were drafted for a forced march south, with the dragons scouting overhead. The new dawn, it seemed, would be forged not of gold and steel alone, but of alliances long thought impossible. Ned took a moment during the meal to gaze across the hall at his scattered family, Sansa chatting quietly with Missandei, Bran watching with his eerie composure, Arya somewhere in the background, half invisible in the shadows. He recalled days long gone when the Stark family had been whole, feasting in this hall with laughter echoing beneath the rafters. The faces had changed, scarred by war. But still, the threads of love and duty bound them together. Perhaps that was the only kind of victory the realm could truly hope for, to find some measure of unity amid the ashes of old grudges. When the feast ended and many drifted off to rest, Daenerys pulled Ned aside. A swirl of torchlit shadows played over her face as she spoke in a low voice. We ride soon, Lord Stark. We bring dragons and armies, but I bring another hope, that Cersei might see reason. I know it's naive, but she won't, Ned said gently, though there was regret in his tone. She's lost too much and sacrificed too much. But if a parley spares innocent lives, we must try. Robert always said she was cunning, manipulative. She'll not yield easily. Daenerys' lips tightened. Then we'll do what must be done. I will not become my father, but neither will I let Cersei remain a plague upon Westeros. Ned bowed. You have my blade and my counsel, your grace. Let us end this war quickly and spare the realm more suffering. She rested a hand on his forearm. Thank you, Eddard Stark. I remember the day I first truly saw you in Meereen, weak from captivity yet unbroken in honor. Had we not found each other, she shook her head, letting the thought hang. Let us finish what we began. With that, she turned and left, the air stirred by the soft rustle of her cloak. Ned stood in silence, the flicker of torches dancing across the stone walls. He thought of how improbable it was that he and Daenerys Targaryen should be allies. Two lines of fate once set on a collision course now intertwined. The next sunrise would mark the beginning of their final push south, culminating in a confrontation that might define the future of Westeros. His thoughts turned to the secrets he had guarded for so long. Jon's true parentage was out now, and though it had not sparked immediate conflict with Daenerys, it might yet shape the realm's acceptance of their rule. Ned prayed that the two Targaryens, and the Stark blood woven between them, would find a path of unity rather than rivalry. If ever there was a chance to break the vicious wheel of history, this was it. Night deepened. Outside, the dragons breathed streams of smoke into the starlit sky, perched on Winterfell's walls like living gargoyles. Tomorrow they would fly, and the armies would march, and the final act would begin. Ned Stark, once fated for the headsman's sword in King's Landing, allowed himself a single private smile. He lived still, bound by honor, guided by love for his family, at the side of a queen who dreamed of more than conquest. If they succeeded, perhaps the next generation would grow up without fearing the cruelty of a mad king or the heartbreak of endless war. The darkness outside seemed less oppressive, the stars brighter. Ned breathed in the cold air, then turned away to seek what rest he could. The wheel turned, the new dawn beckoned, and he would do his part to guide the realm toward the peace it so desperately deserved. Whatever battles lay ahead, Eddard Stark would stand firm, sword in hand, heart true, protecting Daenerys Targaryen and the realm they both strove to save from destruction. And if the gods were good, they might succeed.